the Trenbolone sandwich. I'm running 25 milligrams per week, and I can't wait to get off of it. But this 25 milligrams a week was also, I know you're laughing your ass off, right? It's also been.
I hate it. I love it and I hate it.
It's fucking effective, though. It worked like a charm. Dude, I went from 92 kilos to 110 kilos. Leaner.
Yeah. That's what I leveraged hard in my last cycle.
I'm going to have to put it in S tier.
I would say the same. I'm giving it an S too. It works.
Even though it's so it has so many side effects, and it's so brutal, and it fucks with your mind, and it makes you angry, and the night sweats
and sweaty,
the sweaty, smelly, and so you can mitigate all of that by keeping the dose low. But from a bodybuilding perspective, like if I was just a meat-haired bodybuilder, I would put it in S tier always. Yes. Welcome to episode 5 of the Anabolic Roundtable with Kurt Havens and Dr. Dean St. Mart. Dean, you are now perpetually known as Mr. 3 Days Out because every show we do, you're 3 days out.
Yeah,
and I'm sick of it. I don't want to hear about the shit anymore. How many pineapples and apples and bananas did you add the last month?
No, that's the thing. Nothing has changed. This is the crazy part. You'd expect things to get more and more difficult the more shows you do, and this is just like when the last show I done a few weeks ago with Derry, I literally just turned up. No one knew I was doing the show, and they're like, "Oh, you're competing today?" I was like, "Yeah, just test the waters here again." Consider it's only a 15-minute drive down the roads, but it's now, there's no sort of end goal. This Sunday is probably the last show of the season where I'll be happy to hang it up for another while, retire, as to speak. That this was sort of, the what if has been truly boxed off. That
right
every other years when I competed, being a mountain to climb, this has just been a walk in the park.
How was the 5-amino-1MQ edition? Because in the private chat you said it was helping quite a bit. So what is your review so far?
So I ran 100 milligrams for, I think it was 20 days or 21 days when we had the discussion. I was, I think, 3 weeks out from that last show. And it definitely took the last bit of fat off, just above my hip. So my lower back had nice striations, just above the hip. The glutes, definitely where the glute and ham tie in, was a lot deeper. So it definitely done the job of taking those last tiny bits of fat that was sort of lingering on the physique.
Right. Good.
I think what we done for the last show, I guess to sort of, we did do a small change. Like we said in the group chat, we sort of pushed fullness for this last show because I didn't have any weight cap with Classic. So we kept growth in. So it was a lot fuller. I wasn't as dry, but I was pretty much close to where I was in the previous show, but I was 3 kilos heavier. So we sort of,
that's a big difference.
6 pounds roughly. So GH stayed in, and then we sort of loaded with Superdrol on the loading days, the training days, running into the show. And that's when you really, if you are lean and you're listening to this, playing with those sort of things in the final end towards a cosmetic look for fullness, can just put that cherry on the top of the cake.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to start Superdrol next week, baby, for the Mr. Olympia, though. Not for competition.
So how much would you plan to run?
I'll probably run 30.
Cool.
Yeah.
Standard.
Yeah, standard dose. Yeah. 2 weeks. Or maybe 10 days, depending on how I feel. I have to do my blood work this Friday, see where my liver enzymes are at, because I've been hitting PRs the last couple of weeks, so I'm sure they're a little bit elevated. And I'm already starting to feel like, this cycle needs to end soon. So let's see what the blood work says. But if everything's okay, then the Superdrol's in, and then I won't be able to fit any of my clothes anymore at the expo.
Once it comes out before the expo, so you have severe shin splints from the fluid retention.
Exactly. Like my jaw is already like today I was eating a little bit of beef and chicken and eggs at the same meal with a good amount of vegetables. And then after I was done with the meal, my jaw was just get a pump. And even the tongue, it's, I'm feeling very anabolic recently. Very anabolic. I didn't really change much to the protocol. The only thing that I did based on our previous conversation was increase the magnesium from 200 milligrams with meals to 300 milligrams. And I added in magnesium threonate, so it's about 144 milligrams with dinner. So I went from total of around 2,000 milligrams to 2,800 milligrams. And now I have carpal tunnel in my forearms.
Horrific.
And I just discussed this with, so my potassium is high, like 10,000 to 12,000 milligrams per day. My calcium is about 2,500 milligrams. My sodium is about 4,000, 5,000 milligrams, 12 liters of water. So I'm like, why does increasing the magnesium give me carpal tunnel when I never in my freaking life had carpal tunnel before? So I can't wait to get off the growth hormone end of this week. Like I'll stop that 1 week before I fly, because otherwise my edema is horrible. Then again, the fat loss and the progress and the strength has been phenomenal. So I feel it's a trade-off, but then waking up with my hand, I can't even close it. I'm like,
do you notice strength directly from growth? I do not.
If I injected pre-workout, yes. Okay. Yeah. So I because sometimes I get a little bit of edema on the days that I don't get enough steps. So I decided, you know what, let me take my growth hormone before activity. So I shoot 10 IUs intramuscularly and I go to the gym. And now the edema is significantly less, but the performance also goes up. Could be from the lipolytic effect that you get from the growth hormone, right? Maybe free from fatty acids towards the end of the workout being utilized. So fat loss has improved quite a bit, but the carpal tunnel is also a little bit annoying. So I got a couple more days. When this pen runs out, I'm done, and then I'm ready to get lean up. But uniformly, I'm lean. So let's say that you're 7% body fat, yeah, something like that. I'm excited to see what everything looks like without the GH water. Yeah, what was your experiment, Kurt? You said you finished your cycle. You also ready to come off?
Yeah, I'm off now. So I dieted down to 202, which put me pretty close to show condition.
Yeah,
like my glutes were in. I mean, that's not that difficult for me to get pretty close. And then it was Tren, Anadrol, Test, Equipoise, and growth hormone. I started at 18 units of GH, but the fatigue was unreal the next day. Like I couldn't stay awake. So I brought it down to 9, and I gained 13 pounds in 8 weeks.
Holy moly.
I sent you the picture.
Yeah, and
it didn't look like I gained any fat.
Dude.
So
you look crazy.
But it was time to take it down and go back to TRT.
Yeah, if you grow like a thick beard, you look like a legitimate space marine.
Yes, it was
with the suit on.
With the suit on, exactly.
Yeah, just ball your shoulders. Absolutely crazy. Yeah. So I'm excited to see what you look like in real life in 2 weeks from now. I'll probably be around 230. My weight is dropping very, very fast right now, so I'm trying to eat up into it and make the most out of these last 2 weeks, getting as lean as possible. But I'll probably drop a good amount of water from taking the growth hormone out, and hopefully the Superdrol will compensate for that. All I know is that I can't fit in all my favorite shirts, so I might have to go shopping when I go to the US. So that should at least be a good excuse to spend some money on clothes.
Yeah, Vegas has stuff, so you can find clothes there.
Yeah, I'm excited. Kurt, you said you were working on several studies. Can you divulge a little bit about the details? Because it's very exciting.
The first one, there is no defined pharmacokinetics of testosterone cypionate or any of those esters that contain an aromatic ring. So I was going to we're working on testosterone enanthate versus testosterone cypionate and just trying to determine if cypionate's even an effective ester.
Right.
I'm going to say it's not going to be that effective of an ester after all this time. I don't think it's broken down quite as effectively as a straight chain fatty acid. So that's something we're working on. So that should be published hopefully soon. Next week I can fill you guys, or next month, hopefully we'll have more on that. And
so how can you discuss a little bit or disclose a little bit about the study setup? Like we're using human subjects or rats or
humans.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
And just TRT doses, nothing crazy. We're looking at serum, testosterone, free testosterone, and just the other standard metrics. Nothing crazy. I just want to see what it does to the blood markers versus straight chain fatty acid, and then the next part of it. Then I would go back and kind of redo what the original Minto study did in the 60s with Nandrolone and show that MPP, the phenylpropionate ester, is neither short nor effective as an ester for Nandrolone. And that's why the FDA had pulled it off the shelf after a year. right? And they switched
Right.
to decanoate. They started with all sorts of esters, right? The laurate, they tried a ton of things, and decanoate was where they settled because it seemed to be the most effective. And that's, I think, what is kind of misunderstood, right? You see that with boldenone too, right? There's a reason why it has that ester attached to it, because that was the effective ester when SIBA designed it, right? So there's all different versions, right? There's a Cypionate, there's boldenone Cyp now. Again, I don't think that would outdo the standard, version of equipoise. But we
Seems
can,
that the most
I can take this other places.
Yeah, it seems that the most effective esters are just the ones that have a straight line, a little bit squiggly, and they can, the esterases can kind of cleave off the carbon chains one by one instead of having this cyclical structure, which is the case for cypionate and nandrolone phenylpropionate and hexahydrobenzocarbonate, Parabolan. Right, those three. Because when you look at into the half-lives, like what we discussed off air, it's all over the place. Right? Some say the half-life is 5 to 6 days. Some places say the half-life is 10 to 12 days. And it's very confusing. And like you mentioned off air, there seems to be a cap on how fast these esters can be metabolized. And thus serum levels will never be above a certain amount. Yeah. So even if you inject like 6 grams of cypionate, like Chase Iron style, your serum levels would never be as high.
Correct.
Because
that's what
your body
gets.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, that was my original inspiration for this. And also to redo, just because you see so much MPP being used now. And again, with the metabolism of it, you're seeing, it doesn't seem to stack. That's one of the reasons why it has to be used frequently. It's not used frequently because it's a short ester. It doesn't build on the original dose versus a straight chain fatty acid. When you inject a xanthate or decanoate, right, each dose will subsequently build higher and higher, like steps going up. Or nandrolone phenylpropionate doesn't seem to do that. It just seems to have these little peaks, and then it holds at this really at a level that's basically not effective. And that's not that that would be the same theory as tapering off steroids, right? Like I think it's a wise idea when you start a cycle to taper up the doses to minimize side effects. But the old fashioned way of stepping down doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because you're still causing suppression, but you're at an ineffective dose. Right. So that,
and without escalating the dose upwards, you would still need to resort to other esters if you want to go with bodybuilding dosages, because if there's a cap on how much of these esters you can metabolize at any given time, then okay, for TRT, maybe you're fine. Maybe that's like the rate limiting factor, similar you would put on a motorbike. So you can't drive, faster than 25 miles an hour in certain countries. It's like, this is the maximum speed you can have with the motorbike. And same with cypionate. This is the maximum serum level you're going to have with the cypionate. Yep. And that's it. Right? So it's suitable for TRT. You can have 900 nanograms per deciliter, no more. But then for bodybuilders, that will be unwise, because we do want, 5,000, 10,000 nanograms per deciliter.
And Chase did not use cypionate. I don't remember what ester. He used an interesting ester.
He used isocuproate, but isn't that a cyclical one as well?
Is that, Gene?
That's what we're on about here. That's phosphodiesterase 7B, which cleaves off the esters. And that's how they look in 3D space, because everyone just sees these flat molecules and never really pays attention to how the ester contorts itself in 3D space. So you can see like cypionate and phenylpropionate, how the ring position even changes. That phenyl group is pointing down in like a beta position or cis position, and in cypionate the ring is coming out towards you. And what we're sort of looking at is how efficiently can they get inside that binding pocket to cleave that away. So your straight chains like propionate, enantate, and even decanoate could probably slot in there very easily, because I don't have this in like 3D motion, but these are rotating around in space, so they can actually change their shape slightly, where half of it could be pointing down and this half could be pointing up, to allow it to go into that binding pocket. So we never really pay attention to, 3D space like that. So it's definitely something to consider when we're talking about like the esters and the half-life of the ester. It's down to that PD7B. And, there's probably a level of genetics of how well you express that enzyme, the total amount of the enzyme, the shape of the enzyme could vary person to person, where a small little single polynucleotide, polymorphism could change that slight binding pocket structure that Cypionate might not fit it for you properly versus an antate might be a better choice.
And that's why you see with a lot of individuals, they swear by certain esters. Like for me, I figured this out a long time ago, that Enantate, Masteron Enantate, Testosterone Enantate, Primo Enantate, that all works beautifully for me. I have the most stable serum levels. All metabolizes fast, no post-injection pain. So that's what I stick with. But daily subcutaneous microadministrations. And this gives me the best results. And then I switch to propionate or cypionate or decanoate or undesonate, right, the EQ, and I get a little bit, less favorable response. So I figured this out a long time ago. That's why I made the videos that I made about esterases and metabolism and esters and, choosing based on the half-life. And it seems to be helpful information. But again, everybody's different regarding their metabolism. And if you can figure out with a decent sample size why cypionate is just a poor choice, then of course Pfizer is not going to be very happy with you because they have the patent. Then again, the general public isn't very happy with Pfizer either because some of their products give, elevate your cardiac markers like it did for mine. So I guess we're even then.
Yeah. And I don't know them anything.
Yeah, nobody owes them fucking anything. So what is the timeline for those studies to be published? Because I got one publication done with Tim Piatkowski, so I'm already on PubMed. Under Vigorous Steve, no less.
That's interesting. They took that as a name. Okay, we're starting injections next week, so should only take a couple weeks. I just need some labs.
Okay,
should be pretty simple.
Let me know when it's ready. I'll make a fucking deep dive video about it because I love documenting studies of my friends on my YouTube channel, and then you can be a guest speaker to explain it all. That would be very cool. Very cool. So you're done with your cycle. Dean is still on his cycle. I'm on my cycle. Dean is not entirely sure if he's going to make it to the Mr. Olympia, but you're welcome to make a surprise appearance. Like, surprise, motherfuckers, I'm still
here. Yeah, no, it's still on the cards. Obviously, we've got like I said, the hub, the supplement needs hub is pretty much coming to the end. That massive project myself and Lee decided to undertake at the start of the year. It's all coming a reality now with paint going onto the walls of the gym space, and it's pretty incredible. We've documented on the Supplement Needs YouTube of it was basically like a server manufacturer. I think it was the company we bought the building from, and we've literally just knocked down everything. You wouldn't even think of how the old building was. So the gym install is the weekend or finishing the weekend of the Olympia. So I'm not sure travel wise between going to Southampton Pool for the hub install and maybe going up to Heathrow and flying across.
Quickly. Just on the you tell your wife, say, I'm taking a detour on the way back home. And then you come to us, we'll eat at McVeigh's, we'll do the Mr. Olympia weekend, we'll host you. And then Sunday morning, we'll send you on your way. I said, thanks for coming, have fun. And then hopefully you'll be like 15 pounds heavier. Nice and full, and then your wife's like, "How many? What happened?"
That's a rebound.
Just go dark. Don't go dark on social media and tell her nothing.
Well, you'll see. You'll be on everybody else's social media because you're famous, dude. I mean, when we were in Dubai, we couldn't work out either. It's like, hey, Dean, hey, Steve. That was hilarious. So yeah, Kurt is going to have his first dose of the Mr. Olympia and see how in demand he's going to be. Yeah, you're gonna have fun.
It'll be interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Hey guys, today on the menu I have a couple things. I wanted to classify Injectable steroids, and then we'll do follow up for the oral steroids and maybe the niche steroids later on, based on S tier, A tier, B, C, D, E, F tier. So we don't have so many to go through. I would just go and quickly describe and kind of classify them if they're good, overpowered, or absolute trash. And then we can do that for the oral steroids as well. And then if that's popular, we do that for like the niche compounds, like the check drops and the methyl Tren. That shit nobody uses, but might be interesting nonetheless. Kurt, you wanted to talk about classifying steroids into two groups, right? Genomic and non-genomic.
Yep.
And then I want to retouch on this Mirabic run because I finally finished a deep dive yesterday that will drop before this podcast. So everybody watching will already be very well aware. But I still want to run some ideas past you guys regarding beta 2 and beta 3 and even beta 1 adrenergic receptor activation, because there's a lot of overlap between salbutamol, clenbuterol, and mirabegron, especially at higher dosages, and you might be able to stack them together quite well. Because clenbuterol and salbutamol have anabolic properties at certain dosages, but mirabegron does not. So you might be able to, or at least not in the scientific evidence. So let's get started with the classifying steroids based on the tier list. And I'll make a fancy graphic, so I'll just keep some notes and then we'll review everything. Let's get started with testosterone. Dean, give me some benefits and maybe downsides of testosterone and where you would like to classify that. From S tier being the absolute overpowered best steroid on the planet, and then A to F tier, and A being good. Right? A being good enough to win over the other steroids, and F being absolute trash, never use it again.
So I guess pros, you can use it to manipulate your natural testosterone, so you can take obviously like a multiplicative factor of what you produce naturally and exponentially multiply it by that. Second one, I guess, is you are giving your body a bioidentical hormone, so something that you already produce naturally, to speak. So from a oxidative stress perspective, it's not going to be probably as, I guess, lowering your antioxidants within your body to the same extent as some of the other pro-oxidative steroids that we're aware of. The cons, I guess, is that testosterone doesn't stay as testosterone. It has, 3 other metabolic pathways. So you've got estradiol production, DHT, and then just being metabolized or sulfated or glucuronidate, and then out it goes out of your body. So you can't definitively say, let's say you take 1,000 milligrams of testosterone, that you're going to get the serum level of 1,000 milligrams of testosterone. It comes down to the genetics of the aromatase, 5-alpha reductase, and then your liver metabolism. So I'd say if you were to tier it, I'd probably put a B, being like, sitting on the fence. You could argue it's S tier because it's sort of, the crux of all anabolic cycles. But the fact that we can have so many variables that come out of it, I sort of have it towards the top, nowhere near F, but I think we have other compounds that, if we're talking about anabolism and muscle building, they can leverage it more in your favor than testosterone would. But by all means, testosterone being obviously your base for most anabolic cycles, I put at B.
Okay.
B. Okay. Kurt, what is your opinion?
I would have given it an A, but I mean, I definitely see his point that it's the only one that has bioidentical estrogen.
Yeah.
Right. And it's unique because it truly is the only one that is both non-genomic, fully non-genomic and genomic. So you get both sides, right? So there's a lot of activity that occurs for muscle growth that's also non-genomic, right? The standard is we always just look at the classic AR, but testosterone clearly does other things that's not through the classic AR, whether it's through the cell surface androgen receptor or some other mechanism that we don't know, right? I mean, when you put it even against DHT for even sexual function, even when estrogen is removed with an aromatase inhibitor, testosterone can still support sexual function in a way that DHT alone cannot. So it's not necessarily just estrogen. There's other things going on. And if it was just AR, DHT binds to the androgen receptor more firmly than test. So it's clearly not just an androgen receptor issue. These are kind of where we're kind of left figuring out what some of this stuff actually does. We don't know.
No, we still don't know.
I mean, I would still give it, I would give it an A because I think you could accomplish, let's say 90% of the effects of all the other drugs with just testosterone up to a point, right? I mean, it's not going to be a linear as you titrate up. But I think, outside of being a pro bodybuilder, being competitive on stage, I would say if you had testosterone and perhaps growth hormone, you could probably accomplish pretty much anything.
True.
Versus if you took, if you replace that with equipoise, you're not going to accomplish the same thing.
Right. So this is one of the reasons why I would put testosterone in S tier, because it's bioidentical, it's readily available, it's probably the most studied steroid out there, and you can even study testosterone based on endogenous production and get some sort of details regarding exogenous use. So when you PubMed testosterone or research testosterone, you can get so much data compared to Anadrol, which is probably the second studied steroid out there. Now, the problem with testosterone is the metabolites, right? Yeah. But it seems to be dose dependent. So
genetic dependent too.
Yeah, also genetic, right? So let's say your body fat levels are good. You don't have too much 5-alpha reductase expression. You don't aromatize heavily. You can ramp up the testosterone reasonably high and get a good anabolic and a masculinizing response, right? Masculinizing from a point of anabolism. The downside is that if you're a non-responder, you aromatize heavily, you 5-alpha reduce heavily, you glucuronidate heavily, and sulfatase, etc., then obviously you don't get so much bang for your buck with testosterone, but that's individual response, and you can circumvent to a certain extent with ancillary medications. So I would say that testosterone is S tier because you produce it already. Your body recognizes testosterone, knows what to do with it. Mm-hmm. And if you live the lifestyle, your body fat levels are low, right? You don't have too much phytoestrogens in your diet. You manipulate your 5-alpha reductase maybe to a certain extent by keeping NAD plus levels and that kind of stuff just all sufficient. And again, you fulfill 90% of the functions that you could get from other steroids. And it's the compound that everybody needs to look into first. And we're not going to do a Primo only cycle or a Masteron only cycle or a Trenbolone only cycle right from the start. We do testosterone only first, assess response. And if you're one of the 1 to 5% people that get an adverse reaction, okay, you're probably less of a chance to get an adverse reaction compared to the other steroids. So, Kurt, you put it at A tier.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify so people can understand. Yeah. So aromatize, its conversion to estrogen is going to be controlled by a lot of lifestyle things, like you said, and body fat, right? We can manipulate that through what we do with our bodies, where the 5-alpha reductase is determined by your genes. You're born with a set amount of 5-alpha, and that is not a whole lot you can do about that, right? I mean, as you increase doses, you'll get more expression of it because you have more binding that occurs with the dose response, but you're not reducing, you're born that way, right? So if you're unfortunately born with a ton of, that expression, you're born with a ton of it.
But then the worst side effect of having elevated DHT levels, it's not the libido, right? DHT is good for libido. DHT might have some anti-cancer benefits by inhibiting estrogen-mediated gene transcription in cancer tissue. So the worst thing about DHT is hair loss. Now, right? Or am I missing something that DHT might be linked to prostate cancer, but the more research you do, the less likely it is, right? The less likely it is.
The structure of it dictates that it can't be a carcinogen. Yeah. Because the saturated A ring. So it can't, it would actually be an anti-carcinogen.
Right. So if you keep your body fat levels low, your phytoestrogens are zero, right? And you maybe put something in place to reduce aromatization even more. And it could be, could be Cialis, could be zinc, could be, so many natural aromatizers.
Don't be so fat.
Yeah, exactly. Not being such a fat slob, right? None of us are, luckily, but you'd be surprised how many people taking testosterone and fat slobs. Just use an aromatase inhibitor then. But so you take testosterone, you maybe need one ancillary to kind of minimize the aromatization or lifestyle changes. Yeah. The DHT, I think you can let run rampant unless you care about hair loss, right? But that's mostly a mental and security thing. So you have one metabolite that might be beneficial if that's controlled, right? IGF-1 production, lipid levels, skin quality, collagen synthesis up to a certain point, right? We're not going to let our estrogen run wild like some educators like to do. And then you basically ask for cancer and gynecomastia and acne. I'll just say, I just let it run wild, man. And then here's my discount code for the gynecomastia surgeon. Yeah. So that seems to be the most problematic thing about testosterone. The excessive aromatization, which you can manage with lifestyle or an aromatase inhibitor, Whereas with other steroids, if you really ramp it up high, you get worse side effects. So I'm still going to pitch testosterone for S tier. Did I convince you guys, or do we need to put it in A to B tier?
You can leave it there.
We can. I was being devil's advocate in the whole scheme of things of being like really assuming you're not getting the most bang for buck milligram for milligram if you really think about what happens to it from the metabolic pathways.
Yeah,
but
true.
I'd be convinced if we put it in S. I wouldn't argue against it.
Okay, I'm going to put it in S because it's I'm the host. Okay, Primo's next. I would say that's the second best compound. Who wants to go first?
No, second best as far as anabolism or
Just
because
overall.
of safety overall?
Yeah, overall.
Sure. I mean, the issue becomes you can't really run Primo solo,
True.
right?
So you need testosterone as a base,
testosterone
right? Going
or
forward,
Dianabol
we have-
or Dianabol.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
recommending it. I'm just saying at least
Yeah.
you'd have some level of estrogen. You could probably figure out another way to get there. It's very tissue selective, right? It's got a firmer binding affinity to the AR than testosterone. It should cause very specific tissue expression versus testosterone is going to cause more broad. It would be considered safe, right? Technically, depending on the dose, right? Obviously, if you're running 3 grams of it, maybe not so much. It does show some level of liver stress because of it being methylated. But again, it is kind of a one-trick pony in that it's really just acting through the AR. So it's missing it has that I'm aware of, no non-genomic effects. So you're not really getting the full gamut of effects that you would get from testosterone, right? So I definitely think it's a first-tier steroid, and I think it would be considered safe, easy to use, assuming you can find real Primo. But yeah, I mean, it has its downsides. Unfortunately, that's why I consider testosterone to be kind of at the top, because even with its metabolites being the downside, you can still run it alone, where none of the other drugs you can really use alone.
No, you would still need a testosterone base.
But testosterone.
So assuming going forward that we have testosterone as a base for normal estradiol levels and fulfilling the basic physiological functions, and then you might want to throw in DHA and pregnenolone just to keep neurosteroid levels. That's assuming the bases are covered. Where would you rank Primobolan? Would that be
I guess
A tier, B tier, C tier? All things considering.
A?
Okay. Dean.
Yeah, I agree with Kurt with it being A class. I guess from a safety perspective, we all know from the molecular weight that it has a much lower number of molecules per standard dose. So that's probably some reason why you find people like complaining that it's not the most efficient muscle builder, to speak, because obviously you have a much lower total amount of molecules in the system. But like Kurt said, it has good selectivity within tissue, provided obviously it doesn't get 3 alpha keto reduced inside your muscle tissue.
Which it shouldn't.
Which it shouldn't.
In
But we, in theory, we have that sort of metabolic pathway of it. From it, like one thing that it doesn't have, which is a positive and negative, is we don't really see too much crossover with interacting with some of the other nuclear receptors, like the mineral corticoid. You don't really see, influences to potassium, sodium, probably like calcium even. We don't really see that non-genomic calcium signaling with it. So, I'd have it at like stacked with testosterone, A class as a predictable builder with relative safety.
Yeah, I agree. What I like about Primobolan is that anecdotally it can keep estradiol in check. And we're still not entirely sure if those biotransformation metabolites, those 2 that you mentioned, Kurt, and that I dived into for the Primobolan deep dive, if those are actually formed in human subjects. But anecdotally, it could be, right? If it's produced by fungi, then
it probably depends on some level of genetics too. I see certain people that take Primo and it crushes their estrogen or manages their estrogen. Other guys need an AI with it. So
true.
There's probably depends on all sorts of things that are.
Paul, for example, he was on a gram of test, gram of Masteron, gram of Primo, and my estrogen would be 0 on that.
0. Yeah.
Yeah, fucking 0. And he would need an AI still.
No.
Yeah.
No, we only use one at the end, I think, to dry them out.
He used it only at the end. Okay.
I usually, when I peak guys, I'll throw it in, a day before a show.
Just to be sure. Right. So the reason why I like Primobolan for this reason is because it allows you to use test and Primobolan in a individual ratio, whether that's 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 or 1-to-2, whatever, based on your blood work. So you limit out one medication that could, skew your lipids slightly. And then if you're going to use something to skew your lipids, it might as well be an anabolic in the form of Primobolan to put some tissue on you, right? Because it will drop your HDL, it will drop your SHBG, and it will drop your estradiol depending on the individual. So I would love to put Primobolan Ester because it's my favorite second compound, but since it's so expensive, that's the only reason. I cannot give it an S tier. I have to give it an A tier like you guys because, again, it's almost the perfect steroid after testosterone, but because it's so expensive, it limits most people's usage. So I can run a gram of Primo per week, no problem, but most people can't afford it, especially now, since because of my endorsements of Bayer Primobolan, the ampules are $36 per ampule, right? $36 per ampule. It's insane. And the price have gone up in Turkey. Like if you go to the Turkish pharmacy websites, they're about $6 to $7 now there, which they used to be $2 to $3, $4. So yeah, market share has gone up substantially. Primo, I love you, but A tier is the best you're going to get. That's it. Let's move over to Nandrolone. I'm going to put it in E tier.
Okay.
Because limited practical applications. I just finished the Nandrolone deep dive. I haven't recorded it yet because it's 80 pages of notes and I get anxiety looking at 80 pages of script. So that's going to take some time. And I want to run Nandrolone while I'm doing the Nandrolone deep dive, which I'll run after the Mr. Olympia a little bit. The reason why I put it in E tier is because there's a lot of scientific evidence showing, heart problems, lipid changes. And the only real practical application I see for Nandrolone is joint lubrication. Because the anabolism you can get from testosterone or Primobolan or some of the orals like Anavar is far superior for collagen synthesis. Primobolan, in my opinion, EQ, right. Milligram for milligram, Primo test.
Winstrol even technically produces more collagen. Because of the C1 protein inhibition, it's going to be counterintuitive, but
yeah, you wouldn't run it at the same time. But so Nandrolone, I purely see as some sort of anti-aging at like 50, 60, 70 years old when your joints are creaky and you have hip problems and joint problems in general. And you want to have a little bit of synovial fluid, right? Or just increased padding and water retention from 50 milligrams to 200 milligrams Nandrolone. I can put it in E tier, but if you want to run a gram of it, it's F for me.
Yep, I agree. And I think that's going to shock a lot of people.
Yeah.
There's nothing. So we could do a whole separate video on just the genetic expression from all the different anabolic steroids from a genetic expression point of view. So the three basic ones that we're looking at are Notch, Num, and WNT are the three genes that are the largest, the most largely expressed from anabolic steroids. It does the opposite with those genes that Trenbolone, testosterone do. And it really only shows efficiency in a state of injury or disuse, right? It has no effect on IGF-1 inside the muscle. I mean, it holds some nitrogen, but what doesn't hold nitrogen? It doesn't, that's not, unfortunately, that's not really like
a selling point.
That's not a selling point because they all do that. Maybe not Proviron, but they all do that to some degree, right? I think, if you need joint lubrication, you could just use more fish oil, or you could use a little bit of Nandrolone.
Yeah, Pentose gold.
Yeah, I just think it's seen its time, and I'm not a huge fan. It doesn't put on any more mass on anyone than anything else. I mean, that's mostly from aldosterone, that's just fluid.
Yeah, it's fluid. And of course, Nandrolone and Testosterone, those are king for gyno.
Oh, yeah. Testosterone's a disaster.
Testosterone is a disaster, but Testosterone puts some serious tissue on you, even at 50 milligrams a week. And with 50 milligrams of Nandrolone per week, you're like, it's good. My joints feel better. I can squat deeper and maybe have those bouncy reps, right? 20 rep bouncy reps for hypertrophy if you like that. But And besides that, I see very limited practical application. And again, if you want to do a nandrolone-only cycle because you're a testosterone non-responder, then nandrolone will be A tier, right? It's not S tier because it's second best to testosterone. It's a second choice, right? You wanted to have the Ferrari, but you ended up with, I don't know, some
Kia.
Kia, because you couldn't afford the Ferrari. So, but you're still driving. So in that case, nandrolone will be A tier. But for most guys responding well to testosterone, Primobolan, equipoise, and other steroids, nandrolone is, in my opinion, E tier.
I would have had a devil's advocate C. I would have had it somewhere a little bit higher, just more so because of the predictability from the aldosterone, that sort of joint lubrication. So if you are having someone in terms of like a strength plateau and you didn't want to go the route of like Anadrol, you could in theory look at, even I'm not a big fan of DECA in terms of like once you stop it, it's in your system for so long. But the same could be said for equipoise. When you sort of look at a cycle design, you've got test, primo. If you're looking at a third choice, in terms of a stack, you're pretty much left to either an oral, equipoise, or nandrolone. And it's sort of, at that point, pick your poison of...
Tren, what are you talking about?
Well,
Trenbolone.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought it was Tren and Anadrol.
Give Tren some love. I mean, I'm on test Primo, Masteron, and Trenbolone, and Winstrol. All low dosages, though, but I just, it works. You'll see.
Yeah,
it works.
And we'll touch on that when we classify them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, that's the problem with the typical class 1 things that we'll get into, is that it's just doing one real thing, right? It's not really great. And that's the problem, is when you design these molecules, right? The goal originally in the 40s was to isolate the anabolic, effects and remove the androgenic. The problem is a lot of the muscle growth occurs from the androgenic effects and non-genomic effects, not so much just from anabolism, right? It's why you wouldn't just run, as a normal healthy adult, you wouldn't just run Anavar, right? No. Or Winstrol, because they both have huge dissociation.
Well,
right?
unless you have brain damage.
Strongest. That's different. Brain damage.
I'm going
to run an oral cycle. IQ just drops another 10 points from 70 to 60. Yeah.
The other, I guess, supporting argument there is like Trenbolone by itself, like a Tren only cycle as well.
I mean, look, in theory with Parabolan, it was done. Yeah. Right. I there's not a ton of data on what actually occurred, but it was done. And there's even studies to show that Winstrol will actually cause bone growth. So we're looking at Winstrol now as a possible thing for osteoporosis, because again, estrogen is sexually dimorphic, and it turns out that maybe men don't need that much estrogen for bone health. And even in women with osteoporosis, it was showing that Winstrol might build bone.
Well, same as with nandrolone. So nandrolone aromatizes slightly, right?
Slightly.
And how much of that is actually DHEA into testosterone into estradiol, right? I mean, as a kind of like an aromatization cofactor. But nandrolone solo dose just does mineralize the bones, same as Anavar mineralizes the bones. So steroids do mineralize the bones and can prevent cancellous bone turnover in estrogen deficient states. That's why it's so popular with postmenopausal women, because they're estrogen deficient, and they wouldn't produce estrogens from the steroids that they were taking. So Anavar, Winstrol, nandrolone, and of course testosterone, even Primobolan, do show some bone mineralization. And I think the only one that didn't show that was Masteron and Proviron.
Well, and Masteron might, but we just don't know.
I think
that's a big problem with Masteron. Is what is it? There's just not a lot of stuff on it.
No, I think I remember reading a study. I might be mistaken here, but I do remember reading a study. There was no effect on bone mass index,
which might show that it has no maybe it has no affinity for the AR.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
It wouldn't surprise me.
So that bone remineralization was actually one of the key hypotheses surrounding the non-genomic response, because of the calcium channel, the calcium ion channel. So I guess, if Masteron doesn't have that non-genomic binding to an appreciable extent, it's not transporting calcium inside cells very efficiently.
All right, so on the topic of nandrolone, right? Me and Kurt put it in E tier, but Dean put a mention in there for D tier, and I can agree. I'm willing to move it up to D tier if Kurt. So we're going to move it up to D tier. All right. then that is classified. All right, we're 3 down, a couple more to go. Let's move over to equipoise. Kurt, you
EQ.
have some experience with EQ recently, right? So take it away.
Love-hate relationship with it. I think it's a decent anabolic. I would say C.
Yeah, C or
Right.
D.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't do anything specifically that you wouldn't get from testosterone per se. Right, you get some red blood cell mass that increases faster than you see with testosterone, but it seems in the end it's equals out. It acts as a fairly strong anti-estrogen, right, through its conversion to E1. It's not going to build tissue. Again, it's a good example of when you lower the androgenic potential of something, how the anabolism goes down as well. So I don't think it's going to build milligram for milligram. I wouldn't put it equal to testosterone. Maybe let's say it's 75% of testosterone. It is nice because it is another way to leverage controlling estrogen without using an AI. If you want, if you're trying to kill, 2 birds with 1 stone and you want to lower estrogen and get more anabolism, you could always add EQ or Primo.
Right.
But you have to be careful because it can really crush your estrogen. As Chase showed with his recent experience.
He's using enough tests for a football team and then a little bit of equipoise and his estrogen was 0.
It's a 6 or something, yeah.
Yeah. And his body fat levels are obviously very low and he's already naturally a low aromatizer. But yeah, when I saw his estrogen, I'm like, okay, just use test, buddy. And I was just using test. And his estrogen is still 25 or something.
Well, because EQ will hang around for 82 days,
Yeah,
give or
true.
take. So
Yeah,
I mean, it'll as soon as it drops to not an effective level, then all of a sudden the estrogen will shoot up. But I think it's a good. I don't mind using it to add milligrams to a stack as long as test is higher than it. I would never run it higher than 1-to-1 with test, and that would be if you're a very high aromatizer. I think it does have use, though. There's a lot of guys throughout history that have used it to put on a fair amount of weight. I believe John Jewett used it for a period of time when he was growing. John Meadows, was a huge fan from what I've been told.
Allegedly.
Lee Haney. I think it's decent, but again, it's a part of a total. Sure. Is it a standalone? No. And that's always going to knock something out of being an S, or even outside of Primo, maybe not even an A, because you can't really just run EQ. I think in Europe, though, some of the guys will pull high aromatizers, but will pull test and just run EQ as a base.
Yeah. The last
give you a
month
nice dry look.
before a contest, you'd run like 750 or 900 or 1200 EQ into the
if
show.
you have no girlfriend or wife, sure, why not?
Oh, you'd be an anxious mess. You can go in a public transport to be you'd be fucking crazy.
COMT, completely overwhelmed.
Yeah. There's not enough GABA in the world to get you out of that situation.
I think as an added milligram, I think it's a valid thing. When if I were going to wait, like Dean said before, I think the 3 typical anabolics that you'd add to test are Primo, EQ, or Nandrolone, pretty much the standard choices unless you're going more extreme. It depends on the person's body type, right? If someone tends to be a little heavier and they convert a little more estrogen, and they're not willing to spend, or they don't have access to real Primo, EQ could be a valid choice there to add something to a cycle. I would still pick Primo over that. I think from Nandrolone would be my last choice unless someone's very thin and they just need overall bulk on them and they don't really care about side effects per se. C.
All right. Dean.
Yeah, I'd have a hang somewhere around like Nandrolone. I guess it's just because of the ester being, it's definitely not going to be a beginner friendly compound who's going to, do a cycle and then come off. Like, this was one of the reasons why I used to get so frustrated over failed like PCT protocols, because guys were starting PCT 2 weeks after stopping shooting equipoise. And by the time they sort of run out like a power PCT or whatever, after 8 or 9 weeks, the equipoise is just clearing out the system at that point. It's like, and then they're wondering why there's no testosterone or LH or FSH because they've been shut down while taking their HCG. So
meanwhile, their estrogen is still low at the end, right? From the tamoxifen metabolites and the Primobolan and the equipoise suppression. So they're like, why have I no libido? And it might be good for LH and FSH production, but the testosterone or the boldenol will still suppress, because estrogen levels are quite high.
So sorry. No, I do agree. Like Kurt said, the hematopoiesis, like the creation of red blood cell aspect. Anecdotally, guys find appetite stimulation to speak from equipoise, but then like if blood viscosity goes out the window, as opposed to like estradiol contributing to fluid retention, equipoise driving your red blood cell count up, that is driving blood pressure. Yes, might help with oxygenation and blood flow delivery, that might help with nutrient delivery and that sort of overall increase in appetite. But then we have to sort of look at the rabbit studies of it being potentially nephrotoxic.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. And it's not just rabbit studies, man. It's human studies.
The dosing
also.
was high, though.
Yeah, no, the dosing was high. But from like the oxidative stress perspective,
that's the most important part.
I think you can get away with better choices that, like Kurt said, it's either C or D. It stays around the sort of nandrolone position.
Yeah, if used correctly, sure, whatever. But
I think so. So equipoise, if you use it correctly regarding the kidney toxicity potential, you will need to keep your estrogen elevated because estrogen has some kidney protective benefits. And the problem is with a lot of these studies that run boldenone only. Now, we do know that estrogen would be crushed simply from HPTA suppression. And there might be some pro-oxidative effects in the kidneys. But a lot of these animal studies that show when you combine that with antioxidants like vitamin C or, what is it called? Royal jelly or a couple other antioxidants, that it's completely how do you pronounce this? Prevented. So yeah, ameliorated, however the fuck you pronounce it. So some of these studies that I did a deep dive on this a long time ago about the human studies and the animal studies. In the human studies, they didn't really track where the boldenone was coming from. So it could be synthetic carrier oil problems. And in the animal studies, they clearly mentioned that in combination with antioxidants, sufficient amounts, that it's a non-issue. Yep. Still, it's a risk, but most of the guys watching this podcast understand that you do need antioxidants. And how many issues do we see in kidneys directly caused by equipoise and not related to high blood pressure?
None. Probably not.
None. Because in the human subjects, they didn't track blood pressure either.
No. And in those case studies with equipoise, when it was like in the ER and they came in and they were having issues, right? Yeah. The problem with case studies is there's no controls. We don't know what else they were doing. You only know what they self-reported. You don't know that they weren't also doing recreational drugs or drinking alcohol or smoking.
Look into the DMZ and Superdrol studies. That's exactly that. Recreational drugs and alcohol all at the same time with oral steroids.
What do you expect to happen? Yeah. And people lie, as we know from bottom up. Everyone lies. So, who knows what they're doing. So I don't usually they're interesting to read, but I don't usually use them as representation of anything.
I group them all together and then I have a chuckle and say, look how stupid people can be. So I love AQ. I haven't run it in a very long time because I always have Primobolan available, and that's my first choice. I like the appetite. I like the red blood cell increase. I can always mitigate that with telmisartan and Anadrol, blood donations, methylene blue, etc. Right? I haven't had the need to donate in over a decade, pretty much. The last time I donated was when I ran equipoise at 1,200 milligrams per week, when my hematocrit was 56% in a hydrated state. So imagine the stamina I had. But I didn't know about keeping hematocrit under control with potentially an ARB or an ACE inhibitor or methylene blue. So those days are kind of over. So I would rank equipoise as a C tier only if you can mitigate the oxidative stress and potential for kidney toxicity by keeping your estrogen levels in range. So equipoise, mandatory blood work every month.
So as I've discussed before, I have one kidney. I was born with unilateral renal agenesis. So my one kidney is larger than a normal size kidney, and it functions as two. But I have lots of labs done on that kidney to make sure that it's functioning. And even on EQ, it wasn't showing any stress. But again, I was running a heftier testosterone dose with it. I was not using an AI. So my estrogen was in range. I think it was a 39 or a 40.
Yeah.
So it was still in a good place. It was at the very top of the range. And there was Trenbolone in there too. And there was no kidney stress, at least that I showed.
But you also eat your vegetables, right?
And I take a lot of vitamins.
Yeah.
I
No vegetables, just vitamins.
I know I eat vegetables too. My point is, I think that's what a lot of
a good joke
bodybuilders
in there,
miss.
Kurt. You got to play with me.
I eat lots of vegetables. But I think a lot of guys don't take care of their health, right?
True.
You take all the drugs in the world you want, So if the soil is not good, the tree's not growing.
Dude, I've been pissing against the wind for the last decade, man. It's catching on, though. It's catching on.
Yeah, I think the two keys are, right, keeping your body fat in a normal place and taking good care of your health, doing cardio every day, like you discuss. I do it every day regardless.
Yeah, so Chase made a very good point. He discussed his blood work, right, and his MRI scan and everything. And he's like, if I can keep myself healthy with minimal issues, why the fuck can't you? I'm running grams of gear.
Because they don't take care of themselves.
But this struck home to me so much because I see problems on guys running 500 milligrams of stuff and they're worried about this and that and this and that. They do your blood work and it's completely fucked. They do an MRI and they got inflammation and or ultrasounds and its organs are larger than usual. I'm like, how bad are you treating your body when guys that I know that take 10 times the amount you take but live the lifestyle, they do the cardio, they eat right, they do a little bit of sauna and some ice bath and all that funky junky stuff.
Getting
I do
sleep,
it also.
Getting
sleep in, right? So how come it's not individual response, man? No. It's just effort.
Lifestyle.
Yeah, effort and lifestyle.
It takes effort to live that way. It doesn't take effort to inject 3 cc's.
No, that's easy.
That's easy.
It's easy. I do 7 injections per day, man. It's fucking easy. But I also make 5 meals fresh. Yeah. Right? And I do my cardio, no excuses. I made a video about this and nobody watched it.
I know. Oh, I watch it. It's great.
You watch it?
I do cardio every day.
Yeah. So you watch it while doing cardio.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so equipoise C-tier unanimously. Let's move over to Masteron.
Okay, that's an interesting one.
Masteron. So let me get started. I did a deep dive on Masteron, right? I really wanted to see if it's anabolic. Could not find any scientific evidence that it's anabolic. It doesn't raise red blood cell count, whereas Anadrol does at a significantly lower amount of a dose. It increases weight slightly in postmenopausal women, but
that had cancer.
That had cancer, so they're in cachexia state already. And even then, it's not really significant. Unlike some people say, I can't find any clear scientific evidence that Masteron was used as a growth promoter in cattle. And I looked, and I have connections with people working at universities. So I don't know where the fuck that statement came from.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah, it's not pure bullshit. Now, is it a great cosmetic agent?
Sure.
Absolutely. Does it make testosterone work more effectively?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Of course, all DHTs will.
All DHTs do. Is that from inhibition of enzymes that metabolize testosterone?
We don't know.
We don't know, right? Potentially.
We know it binds to sex hormone binding globulin. That's all we know.
Yeah, that's all we know, right?
And that's why it's making tests work better.
Yeah, right. Does Masteron inhibit estrogen receptor mediated gene transcription? Could be. Based on DHT, it could. Right? Structurally, it's similar. So the scientific evidence is paper thin. There's 80 studies on it. 80. That's it.
And you got to search for dromostanolone, and what?
And
2-methyl.
Oh yeah, and 2-methyl.
And you can search for 2-methyl-dihydrotestosterone too, right? Because they love to classify it as all different things. I mean, Lilly and Syntex designed it together. They had a joint project, and they split the revenue. They designed Anadrol, Masteron, and Superdrol together. And when the FDA looked at the results, they said basically, Masteron, you got to find another use for it. It's not good for growing.
Yeah.
And so they were like, well, what about breast cancer? Because it showed some delayed growth in breast tissue. And Superdrol was straight up toxic in those studies, right? So they shelved it. And Anadrol was really efficient at anabolism. Yeah. Like that was the winner.
So I think Masteron is a good add-on to a testosterone and or nandrolone cycle just to prevent gyno and to get a little bit more cosmetic effect. Now, if you run 3 grams of Masteron, do you get an anabolic effect? Yes, I'm sure. Yeah. Is that the best route to go?
No.
Probably not.
No. 800 is probably the top of where it's really, maybe a gram, but after that, add something more efficient in there. It dries me out too much, and then your muscles flatten out. So I almost lose. There's that initial strength curve, I think, that occurs with some of those drugs, and then you just I'm constantly you can't get a pump. I don't know. I can't get a pump on Masteron. It flattens me out.
Same. I run 300 milligrams right now.
My skin looks old.
Makes you look old. Yeah. It's some scientific evidence that it might be a pro-oxidant.
Yeah, I think, and even, you know, me personally, anecdotally, it caused hair loss straight up. And that's not just like as
injectable hair loss. Yeah.
You know, not as a DHT or whatever sort of people argue, is more probably so due to like low estrogen and lowering oxygenation of the scalp, that pro-oxidant activity to speak. But that's pretty much why my fringe used to be here. Now it's
yeah. When you can join us in the sun.
When my hair fell out, it fell out during prep a couple weeks out from a show, and it was probably a mix of Trenbolone, Masteron, and my estrogen being completely crushed in the single digits, because it didn't fall out like normal hair loss. It came out in clumps. Like my wife was like, "Your hair's falling out," and I was like, "Yeah, I know." She's like, "No, it's actually falling out," and I went like this, and it was like in my hands.
Yeah, that's oxidative stress and low estrogen. Yeah. Didn't come back.
I didn't do anything to bring it back until years later, so I prevented any further loss. I could grow some hair if I chose, but honestly, when it's kind of nice to not have any hair. I don't even think I'd grow hair if I had it.
Tell me about it, man.
I don't know. I like not having to worry about it, like going all over the place and fixing it. And
it's too much effort.
Sweating.
Yeah, already married, off the market. Who cares? Yeah. Okay, so Masteron, as a cosmetic enhancing drug, I think it's great. I think it's an A, but as a performance enhancing drug, I think it's an F.
Yeah,
yep. I'm with you.
I think it's like lotion. That's what I consider Masteron. I think it's fucking lotion. I don't think it's even a steroid, because it doesn't show any of the classical characteristics of a steroid, where it builds your blood, it builds your bones, and it builds muscle tissue. I think it just makes other steroids work better through unknown mechanisms that will never be studied. And this is the sole reason why guys use it.
And then why not just take
bodybuilding is a vanity project, right? So of course the Masteron has to be in there, just like Winstrol has to be in there at the end. Right? It's you can't run it too long, because otherwise you dry out so much. So I'm willing to put it alongside Equipoise, but
average out as C.
Only during contest prep or cutting phases, not during the off season. Like testosterone off season cutting phase, yes. Primo off season cutting phase, Equipoise and Androlone, Trenbolone, right? All of
them could be used multifaceted.
But Masteron, I wouldn't use in the off season.
Yeah. Which is funny, because in the last 2 years we've watched it become the most popular anabolic add-on to a cycle. Right?
Can't say that physiques have improved that much, though.
I would agree.
And then, like, why not just use Proviron
to
make your steroids work better?
Yeah, exactly. Because it seems that Masteron and Proviron have very overlapping benefits. You know, even though Proviron crushes the SHBG more, and it seems to be even less anabolic than Masteron.
And chemically, they're more similar, right? People compare Primo and Masteron. Chemically, Masteron and Proviron are much more similar.
Yeah.
Primo and Masteron, I don't think, share really any similarities.
And I think you can, weird,
in theory, swap, but they're not getting the same effect.
What's so weird is that methylated Masteron, Superdrol, Jesus Christ, it's anabolic as fuck.
Well, when you put things through the liver, that's what it does. Any drug that you put through the liver.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why, not to go off on a tangent, but with Winstrol, with women, you don't want to give them oral Winstrol, because you've now increased sex hormone, you've decreased sex hormone binding globulin that much further by running it through the liver immediately. You want to give them injectable, because if you want them to virilize, if you give them oral Winstrol, it's probably very much
more free androgens in the bloodstream.
Yeah. You don't want to do that.
Yeah. All right, so where are you on this, Dean?
Average out as a C for me.
Yeah, a C.
All right. So Equipoise and Masteron, C tier. All right, let's do injectable Winstrol. I want to save Tren for last. Keep everybody under seat.
Injectable or oral? Are you doing injectable and oral as two separate things?
No, separate, because the pharmacokinetics are a little bit different. Yeah. And the administration is different. So I'm using injectable Winstrol because I never got much from oral Winstrol. I'm using 50 milligrams per week, sub-Q, daily microadministration. So that's 7 milligrams a day, something like that. I wanted to see if it could mitigate some of the potential water retention from growth hormone, which 50 milligrams per week is not sufficient. But cosmetically, it does help quite a bit. My strength has gone up. My mind-muscle connection has improved beyond the 10 milligrams Anavar per day that I'm taking, but not to the extent of 25 milligrams Anavar per day. I think for mind-muscle connection and overall contractibility of skeletal muscle, Anavar is 10 times better. I have not researched as much into Winstrol as the other steroids because that's later in the to-do list for the deep dive on Winstrol. But again, Winstrol, unlike Masteron, is clearly anabolic. And it has maybe the most cosmetic changes when it comes to skin texture. And right, it's prescribed for angioedema. So it does reduce water retention quite a bit in the skin. And it's such a dramatic difference the last 2 weeks when you're really in shape.
Yeah, I push it up for prep at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. So personally, I would use injectable Winstrol towards the end, not oral, at maybe 100 milligrams, 150 milligrams per day for 2 weeks leading into it. And that's, man, it's night and day. But it's also so risky and so dangerous because you can tear yourself apart, literally, just by, moving the machine a little bit. You'll tear your bicep. It's incredibly risky to run high doses.
Yeah, even from a sterility perspective on how it's made, really. If we're looking at, intramuscular abscess, what's sort of the most highest offender when we look down through the lists? Winstrol. Obviously, we've gotten better as time has gone on. We've moved away from like pure water-based suspensions to a little more exotic solution chemistry. Because if anyone's sort of seen, maybe let's say 10 years ago, you were literally just getting a Winstrol tablet. It was getting crushed up and suspended into water, Winstrol powder being suspended into water and being injected as a local depot. Now that sort of sterility risk is a little bit lower in terms of like what some of the guys are doing with solution chemistry, but still, like you said, it's risky over oil-based. It definitely 100% agree from, I've said it like for all years, out of all the sort of anabolic androgenic steroids, the cosmetic benefit you'll get from Winstrol. Well, in terms of like a contest prep setting, it's the reason why that's what I'm leaning into over Anavar with my setup that we discussed for prep, because I know how well of a cosmetic benefit it gives to the physique.
Yeah, but it also makes you full and hard.
Yep.
So it does add a lot of nitrogen retention and fullness and strength. And again, that's why it makes it so risky, because you add in the Winstrol and it starts making you stronger right away. But it also dries out your joints and reduces the water retention, removing the padding and the protection. And now you tear yourself apart. So I think Winstrol has the biggest disclaimer and instruction manual out of all the steroids. But if you use it correctly, in my opinion, it's S tier. But I can't put it in S tier because it's so risky. So I would have to maybe move it down to A or even B tier because of the infection risk. And again, if you have good product selection, you can circumvent that. And if you train carefully, you can circumvent it. I want to put it in S tier, but I can't. And I'll leave it up to you if it's A or B tier. Or if you say it's F tier because it's just absolute trash, right? Everybody can have an opinion.
Yeah, I'd be hovering between like B plus and A minus. Like it's really, on the fence between the two. Now, my side, I would put a probably B, taking into consideration the liver toxicity, everything we've sort of said, that there is a lot of cons to it, but it does have a lot of positives as well.
Yeah. Kurt?
I'll give it an A. There is room risk. Obviously, that's why it's not an S. I think it is what creates the show look at the end. I think all the things you said, it lowers progesterone. Right? So it's actually good additive with Nandrolone. I don't want to go into too much. You're going to then do in the next video, so I won't ruin all that stuff for you.
No, but it's true. It does inhibit the progesterone receptor, and this is why it thins the skin. Yeah,
and the liver activated glucocorticoid receptor it activates. It has a much longer half-life than previously thought. It has a 24-hour half-life. The oral, so it's not 9. I don't know where the 9 came from. Yeah, I mean, I think the two biggest risks are the three biggest risks: the joint stuff, like you said, the lack of estrogen from it directly, but again, we're using test, and it is liver toxic, so you just have to be careful with it. But I think it's all around a great drug. I'll give it an A.
Yeah. Okay. I can give it an A2. Dean, are you okay with the A classification?
All right. Stick it in.
So Winstrol is now on the same level as Primobolan.
Which is funny, right? Because I think we've like come full circle in the last 2 years with the drugs. Because it was never even considered on the list, right? I think when Derek first did tiers on things, it was considered not an option.
No, I know. But of course, Derek doesn't talk from the context of bodybuilding. It's more like for recreational users.
Totally. Which
but
I get. And
no, but of course, like most people are not the hardcore bodybuilders that manage all the variables. Now, all three of us are hardcore bodybuilders. And we understand the risk. We do the fucking extensive research and we live the lifestyle. And then, yes, you can move Winstrol all the way up.
And Winstrol is going to fit into class 2 as well, which I'll get into later. So it's very unique in its properties.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. Okay, so we got testosterone covered, Primo, Winstrol, Equipoise, Masteron, Nandrolone with Dadroboldenone, and then Tren.
Okay.
Oh, meant Dadroboldenone and then Tren. So let's start with Dadroboldenone. 2 studies. One is available, one is not. The one rodent study shows liver growth, double that of testosterone. Now, how much value can we hold on that? I've never used Dadroboldenone.
I've seen humans with liver failure from it.
Yeah, you have seen it, huh?
Yeah. The guy had a 3,000 ALT and needed a transplant. He was 29 years old. He did run DHB for 1 year, which I don't know why he'd run that for a year, but it destroyed his liver.
Fuck.
And he was only on testosterone as well. So it wasn't some other compound in there. Again, N equals 1, but I've seen it.
And it also increases C-reactive protein. That's the weird thing.
It's toxic. It's an intermediate in the production of Primobolan. When you make test and go to EQ, and then DHB comes out of that, right? If you 5-alpha reduce it, and then you get Primo from that. In the human body, though, Equipoise doesn't really produce a ton of DHB because most of Equipoise is 5-beta reduced.
Yeah.
So the production of DHB from the EQ is pretty much 1%, maybe.
So what you're saying is that if Primobolan was GHB, then Primobolan was GHB, then DHB would be 1,4-GB.
Yes.
The precursor to GHB, which is fucking toxic and causes inflammation. Dean is checking out right now. He's like, what are you talking about?
I'm trying to keep up in my head,
So you have 1,4-GB or GBL. Those are precursors for GHB, right? They're the recreational drug that bodybuilders like as an alternative for alcohol. 1,4-GB and GBL are toxic. They're industrial pain thinners, basically, but with a lot of chefing in the cook at home. Add some salt, right? Keep it simple. You might be able to cook yourself some GHB and then have a nicer time with less toxic effects than the alcohol. So it sounds like DHB Dadroboldenone as a precursor for Primobolan is the exact same thing because it's toxic as shit, causes inflammation, and it's a precursor for Primobolan, which is the goat of all steroids besides testosterone.
And any chemist who's made these things from scratch, if you ask them about DHB, they tell you it's total trash. It's not something they'd ever consider injecting. It is the weirdest physical properties. At room temperature in a large beaker, it's liquid. But when you pour it into a 10 ml bottle, it turns to a gel. So it reacts to the space and the size.
Surface tension from the...
I don't know. And it will not hold at 50 milligrams. So if you buy DHB and it's billed at 50 milligrams per ml, it's not 50 milligrams. It will not hold. So it will hold at like 25, maybe 30. So unless they're adding ethyl oleate or something else really toxic to it, which also could contribute to the liver problems. It's not legitimate. So when you see it at 50 mLs, if it's using BA and BB, it's not really 50.
Yeah.
So then the dosing's not even accurate. Who knows what you're even taking?
Yeah, or it's mixed with propylene glycol, that kind of shit. It's even worse than ethyl oleate. It's literally injecting solvents, so you're dissolving the muscle that you're injecting.
The sad thing about propylene glycol is it's used in chemotherapy, and you see people that have had like long battles with cancer or multiple bouts of cancer, and they've had a ton of that. They have all sorts of allergic reactions and health problems from the propylene glycol.
It's trash, man.
It's horrible.
It's trash.
We shouldn't be using it. And it's in all sorts of things. It's considered a natural flavoring. So it's in ice cream. It's in bread. It's in all sorts of things, and they don't have to list it because they consider it natural.
Liquid SARMs and liquid ancillaries. It's all PEG, man. PEG for 300 or 400.
The interesting thing is I don't believe it occurs in nature. So I don't know how they consider it a natural ingredient.
No, I don't think so either. Okay, DHB. So in my opinion, F tier.
Trash.
Yeah. I've never had any experience, but I've stayed well away from it based on the case study, and known.
We're gonna get a lot of broken hearts today in the comment section.
I mean, what do they think they're getting out of it that you couldn't get out of something else?
I don't know. Every time I see some guy running DHB, I see their physique. I'm like, you could have accomplished that on testosterone only. Yeah. Sorry, dude. I hate to say it, but people like to reinvent the wheel. You know, people like to run exotic shit. That's the way it goes. Talking about exotic shit, what about Trestellone?
Well, Trestellone comes with a whole lot of issues too. Wildly anabolic, right? But tons of issues. I don't know. Yeah. I would give that D.
That's exactly my thought, because I think Trestellone I think it's a better version of Nandrolone, honestly, for anabolism. If you run it at like 50 to 150 milligrams per week, will you get gyno? Absolutely. If you run it with Masteron or Primo, maybe not, or an aromatase inhibitor, right? The 7-alpha methyl estradiol that you get from the Trestellone is potent. It's very potent. 50 milligrams per week can already risk gyno. But there's also an anabolic muscle building potential for Trestellone, from what I've seen, that doesn't match. It almost matches Trenbolone on a milligram for milligram basis. Now, unlike Trenbolone, there are actually 15 human studies on Trestellone. So half of those are implants, half of those are injectable at very low dosages, maybe a couple milligrams a week. And they show that a couple milligrams per week can replace endogenous testosterone levels regarding muscle mass and size, and some guys even get more muscle mass, gain more weight. So the anabolic potential, I think, is very, very high. And I think Trestellone would shine at a low dose of 150 or 50 milligrams a week. But beyond that, it starts to get problematic.
Well, and its metabolic product, the 7-alpha methyl estradiol, is 4 times as potent as E2.
So regarding receptor site binding?
Yeah, and 100. Yeah. And so it's just, I've run bigger amounts of it. I don't remember the amounts because it comes in a weird milligram. You blow it up real fast.
Yeah.
Like within days. Like it's almost like D-ball. I would say anabolic stuff aside, not a great compound.
Okay.
Then even the potential, I guess, calcium signaling for dopamine toxicity as well. It's the one that is anecdotally under Tren in terms of like causing sexual response changes when you delve into some of the anecdotal evidence. That I don't know. It's just I'd have it probably somewhere towards the bottom. That it's a cautionary risk of going anywhere near, to be honest. Like DHB. So
you put it in E or F tier?
I won't have an F. You know, that's very anabolic, but considering what you're trying to wrangle when you use it and the dosage and everything else, either D or F for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm giving it just not an F because it's anabolic, but outside of that, it's drunk.
So let's put it in E then. Below Nandrolone, but above DHB.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would still have to try it, though. This is the only steroid I would still like to try. Trestellone. And I will try it after the Mr. Olympia, because I'm literally going to grow my gyno before I'm going to have it cut out. So I'll do test, Nandrolone, and Trestellone. And then do 1 surgery instead of 4. It'll be a fun experiment for the YouTubes. Yeah. Okay. As an honorable mention, Dean, you've been running Dianolone.
I have. Yeah, Dianolone.
So you're the only one who's used it. If you're talking about injectables, then spill the beans, because I haven't used it. And Kurt, did you use it?
Never.
Okay. So you can classify this one all by yourself.
Dianolone, in the scheme of it, if wherever we're going to place Tren, it's probably, I'm not going to say a step above Tren, but it's definitely one that is a lot more manageable over Tren in terms of like the not mental side effects, but it doesn't seem to be as harsh, but you still get the positive, glucocorticoid suppressive effects of it. I mean, between the two of them, I guess a good experiment would have been just to do the Dianolone by itself, but having to lean on the anchor of Tren, it's been 10 milligrams of each on training days. So what's that, 40 milligrams per week of both? I mean,
So exciting.
it's not massively exciting. If I could try and say, oh yeah, I'm going to do 100 milligrams every other day like Tren Ace, but the Dianolone definitely has had, when it went in the beginning, it definitely had a cosmetic benefit, in terms of like lower glucocorticoids, a drier physique. It came out when we went on vacation. It came out when I was away, and then when it went back in again, it's not something that went back in and all of a sudden your mood or your sleep or anything changed. So I'd probably, depending on who's going to be able to get access to it, because it is not the very easiest thing to get hold of. I got gifted 2 bottles, and I've literally just used coming to the end of 1 bottle for this whole prep. So that was what?
So modest.
The end of June to now, and that whole 10 milliliters have lasted. I'd probably put it like between A and S from a contest prep perspective. Obviously, I haven't used it from a muscle building point of view, but considering the sort of cycle setup of what I'm doing, it's definitely taken a lot of the brunt of the work of tissue retention. So
Okay.
from a cosmetic prep perspective, yeah, sitting between A and S. But again, it all depends on what we're going to classify Tren, because obviously Dianolone is the 2 double bonds. So I think it's the double bond between 4 and 5, and it's the double bond between 8 and 9 position. And then obviously Tren continues on and has the conjugated 3 unsaturated double bonds. So yeah, somewhere between A and S, but that's again anecdotal. I will have to try and swindle a bottle to perhaps offload, so one of you guys can experience and give your feedback.
I can look around and see if I can find it.
Yeah, I'm sure I can find something. And otherwise, I'll ask your guy to hook me up too. I'm sure they would be willing to help. So you're basically putting it at Primo and Winstrol level. Am I correct in that?
I would. I mean,
okay.
In terms of like how I approached my sort of prep stack, we have the 125 test to 300 Primo, and then the 10 milligrams Dianolone and Tren Ace went in, and that was 5 weeks out from that very first show. And it sort of stayed in up until we went on vacation. So it was 8 or 9 weeks total off for the 2 or 3 weeks vacation, and it's back in the last 4 or 5.
Right.
I'd have it. Yeah, adding that in with the test and Primo base just took the sort of contest prep element to another level.
Okay, you're making me very excited. Yeah, I would love to try this at one point. Now we got one more left: the Trenbolone sandwich.
The
daddy of all steroids, the love-hate relationship that we all have with it. I'm running 25 milligrams per week, and I can't wait to get off of it. But this 25 milligrams a week was also, I know you're laughing your ass off, right? It's also been
I hate it. I love it and I hate it.
It's fucking effective, though. It worked like a charm. Dude, I went from 92 kilos to 110 kilos. Leaner.
Yeah. That's what I leveraged hard in my last cycle.
Yeah.
It works.
So, and it okay, did I get some mental issues? Always. I'm not the most mentally stable person, and Trenbolone brings out something of me that only an SSRI could suppress. Unfortunately, the fluvoxamine came out because you can't combine fluvoxamine with methylene blue, and I do like the methylene blue a lot. Thanks, Dean. But mentally, my temper, as you guys might have seen during the Vigorous Q&A, when I go on tangents and rants, to the dismay or enjoyment of the audience. It's definitely crazy on Trenbolone, even at a low and effective dose. I'm going to have to put it in S tier.
I would say the same. I'm giving an S too. It works.
Even though it has so many side effects, and it's so brutal, and it fucks with your mind, and it makes you angry, and the night sweats
and sweaty,
the sweaty, smelly, and so you can mitigate all of that by keeping the dose low, right?
You can, I think cutting on it makes it worse, right? Lack of food will magnify that because your aggravation. Yeah, you're just apathetic on it. You don't care about anything.
True. True.
But
from a bodybuilding perspective, like if I was just a meat-haired bodybuilder, I would put it in S tier always. And that's
for a lifestyle guy, no, it shouldn't be necessarily.
No, it's F tier for everybody else.
But for what we're discussing, I think I would put it S as well.
Yeah, and it sucks though because it's so hard. It's so harsh on the body. Even at low dosages, you clearly notice it, man. Fuck.
We've sort of raised something very interesting there, because what we're sort of ranking these on is A to F from a like hardcore bodybuilder. If you were to like approach it from like lifestyle or gem pop, our like rankings here will probably be completely reversed, where half of them end up in F, where you're like, you just don't go near them.
Winstrol F,
yeah, Winstrol F, 100%. Yeah, but this is called the Anabolic Roundtable. Yeah. This is not for gym rats. This is for hardcore bodybuilders that love this shit, that love the science, that love the experience, that love the decades of coaching experience that is being presented here. So if you're a gym rat, test Primo Anavar, get the fuck out of here. But if you're a hardcore bodybuilder, then this is the list for you, man. And I'm sure many of the bodybuilders will agree. DHB, trash. Testosterone was a fun experiment. Nandrolone, off-season. Equipoise, Masteron, Test, Primo, Winstrol, Trenbolone.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. Right?
And then maybe...
And then there's the orals that we'll discuss next time.
Yeah, and then Dean can maybe move some sales for Dienalone. Make these companies go out of stock, which I'm sure will happen. You'll get the inbox at Dean. Where did you get your Dienalone from? I want to give you a try. Where's your discount code? So make sure you stock up or get your referral links ready. So if Trenbolone is S tier, that makes Dienalone double SS.
I mean, Dienalone is sort of sold off as Tren without the side effects because of the lack of the third double bond changes the flexibility of the molecules. So it's I've never really seen in terms like the anabolic androgenic ratio of Dienalone, but I'm willing to assume it's pretty much on par to Tren without the psychiatric sides.
Well, and the shape is different, right? I don't know if you looked at the model. Like Tren is basically like an arrow that impales the androgen receptor and gets stuck in it, and then sends a crazy amount of electromagnetic currency through it.
Oh man, yeah.
Right. Versus most are like a couch. This is like an arrow that shoots right into it.
Are there any human studies in Dienalone?
Not that I've seen.
Not that I've seen.
Yeah,
and next time we can add. There's those 4 new 19 ors that have come out as well, but they're not going to be available to the public yet.
We're counting on your anecdotal experience, Kurt.
Yeah, we can talk about those next time.
Okay, so let's review the tier list. In S tier, we have testosterone and Dienalone, and maybe Trenbolone. But if Dienalone is better, according to Kurt or according to Dean, then we'll have to move Trenbolone to A tier, alongside Primobolan and Winstrol. B tier, nothing. C tier, Equipoise and Masteron. D tier, Nandrolone. E tier, Testosterone. And F tier, the trash tier, Dihydroboldenone.
Yep, I like it.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Next time we'll do the oral steroids, and then after that we'll do the niche stuff, because this is about 12 oral steroids, and then there's a couple niche drugs. This was very insightful. I'm looking forward to use Dienalone because testosterone, Primobolan, Winstrol, and even Trenbolone is something I wouldn't go without, even though I can't wait to get off the Trenbolone. Maybe Dienalone is a suitable replacement. Dean, hook me up.
Something out.
Okay, so let's discuss this classification of the anabolic steroids, because you can basically classify them in genomic and non-genomic responses. Which is a very easy classification. I never thought about it in that sense, but please fill us in, because it sounds intriguing and actually very informative.
Yeah, so we basically break it into 2 classes, class 1 and class 2. And the initial part, so class 1 is going to be things that work through the classic androgen receptor. Right? So you have, to explain this a little further so people understand, you really have 3 known locations on the cell for the androgen receptor. There's the classic one that goes to the cell surface, binds an androgen, brings it in and causes protein synthesis. That's the majority of what we're looking for from an androgen. You have the one that stays on the cell surface that does not cause gene transcription. That's typically what's considered non-genomic. I can go into what those effects are as well. And then you have one that's subcellular that we know very little about. And the only practical drug that we use that interacts with that is Winstrol. Danazol also interacts with that, but no one in the right mind is using Danazol.
Okay.
So we're not really sure that's kind of what makes Winstrol unique, is that it seems to be the only one that deals with that. So in the simplest terms, a class 1 drug that interacts with the androgen receptor is just dealing with protein expression, right? And that's where the genetic thing in bodybuilding comes from. Your response to steroids is genetically controlled, right? That's what bodybuilding is. It's your genetic response to drugs, training, and food. The non-genomic, so we don't really know all of the non-genomic responses to drugs. The 3 that I'm pretty well aware of are nerve stimulation, which you see with things like halotestin, Anadrol. That's immediate strength, right? That you get in a day or two from taking these things, or if you take pre-workout. Right. And then there is, so whatever's occurring in the microsome with this Danazol, with the Winstrol, that is non-genomic as well. But again, we don't know what that response is. And technically, the proliferation of stem cells would be considered non-genomic as well. So that's kind of interesting. So most steroids have mixed activity, but most of them favor one or the other. Like testosterone is fully mixed, right? Right. It is the original hormone, and it is fully mixed activity. And then what we did is we classified them based on how they respond. And the practical use of this stuff, it's not just arbitrary, is then how and why you would combine certain things to get an effect, right? So the typical class 1 drugs would be, the testosterone being mixed, EQ, Primobolan, Anavar, Trenbolone. So Trenbolone is Nandrolone, pretty much are all class 1 drugs. Some of the drugs we don't really know what they're fully doing, like Masteron, right? We don't know.
Yeah, it hasn't been studied.
Check drops, who knows? And then class 2, what would Dianabol, Anadrol, which has no known affinity for the androgen receptor, Winstrol, and Anadrol, Dianabol, and Winstrol would be the classic type 2 drugs. So then when you're combining things, if you start with testosterone as a base, right, and you add another compound to it, if you add EQ, like we discussed before, you're really just adding milligrams. You're getting a 1 plus 2, a 1 plus 1 equals
all
2.
The same pathway. Yeah, it's all the same pathway.
You're just hitting the AR over and over again. So you're not getting anything more out of EQ from a pure muscle building point of view than you would by just raising the testosterone in theory. In fact, you're probably getting less. But when you combine the classes, you get a synergistic effect. So you would technically cover all the bases by adding, testosterone again as a base, Trenbolone and Anadrol, or Trenbolone and Dianabol, or the addition of Winstrol would technically cover all of the bases, and you'd have a much more magnified effect. So anyone who's ever used Trenbolone and Anadrol together, it's much more noticeable growth than you would get just from adding Primo and Tren. All right. If that makes sense. So that's really the simplest way to explain it. So it explains why you would choose to add certain things depending on the effect you're looking for versus just adding milligrams, right? And there are effects to some of these other class 1, like EQ, right, with the vascularity and things, or Masteron with the hardening. But again, you're not getting a greater sum than you would by just raising testosterone. So really the effective, unique drugs. That doesn't mean that there's not a purpose of all the other drugs, but the ones that are really unique are Test, Tren, Winstrol, Anadrol, and Dianabol all do something very unique inside the body, versus the other ones. Really, there's just a lot of, overshadowing in their effects. There's not a ton of stuff that comes out of Primo that you couldn't get from Test, or Nandrolone that you couldn't get from Test. Right. So this is kind of when we look at what's effective and what's not.
So when it comes to stacking, ages ago, I made a video about anabolic pathways. We have the androgen receptor, right? We have glucocorticoid receptor inhibition, growth hormone receptor, maybe some anabolism through the beta-2 adrenergic receptors, insulin receptor, IGF-1 receptor, etc. But maybe we can specify or split up this androgen receptor into 3 pathways. And then with intelligent compound selection, right? Like you said, testosterone, Trenbolone, Winstrol, Anadrol, the anabol in certain contexts, you get more mileage out of these 3 subtypes of the androgen receptor, whether that's genomic, non-genomic, or within the cytoplasm, what you said.
Yeah.
So you get 3 anabolic pathways out of 1 classification of anabolics, right? And of course, growth hormone could be considered an anabolic alongside testosterone base or other anabolic steroids, and clenbuterol salbutamol can be classified as an anabolic through the beta-2 adrenergic receptor. So this is actually very interesting, because then with cycle design, your test plus Anadrol or test plus Winstrol or test plus Trenbolone would make more sense than test plus a DHT derivative.
It does. If you're looking for an end result that's greater than just milligrams, right? But again, if you're a new user and you don't necessarily need that strong effect, maybe that's not the smartest way to go, right? Because there are side effects with Anadrol, Trenbolone, and those, Winstrol, like we said, is a fantastic drug, but there are side effects that there's a risk there.
So on the fly, can you design like a cookie cutter protocol that would optimize all these pathways just off the fly?
Yeah. So if you just did test, Tren, Anadrol, and Winstrol, like if you used, a smaller dose of Anadrol and a smaller dose of Winstrol in there together, that would cover all of the bases. There would be really nothing left that you wouldn't, that you could accomplish with adding something else.
So all I'm missing is the Anadrol.
Yeah, or you could just use, right, so 50 milligrams of Anadrol plus 50 milligrams of Tren, as an example, is going to be more effective than 100 milligrams of either of them by themselves.
Right.
So that's really just the theory versus, adding 50 milligrams of Masteron to 50 milligrams of Primo doesn't do anything to yield you 100 milligrams of androgens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
because you see a lot of just arbitrary cycle designs where guys just throw in compounds. Again, you're increasing the milligrams, so you should be increasing the effect to a certain degree, but is it even more effective than just raising the dose of the test? Probably not.
No, probably not. So this is true synergy, where you're optimizing all of these pathways, and this is always my cycle design philosophy has been like you get the maximum amount of anabolism through each pathway with the minimal side effects, and this is why I keep dosages low, but the compound selection is wide.
Yes, you get more of an effect with
more of an effect on lower dosages, and of course the overall exposure. Right, I'm still exposing myself to 750 milligrams of steroids per week. Whoop-de-fucking-do. It's not the end of the world. But I'm also, on Increlex 2 times a week, the IGF-1 and the growth hormone, which increases my IGF-1 levels. And then I was using a beta-2 and beta-3 adrenergic receptor agonist, which can have some overlap for anabolism. Right? So I got all my anabolic pathways covered. But it's good to know that combining particular steroids can actually enhance this pathway through the androgen receptor more. Has this been studied in selective androgen receptor modulators, or have you not really dived into that?
No, they have not. So that's kind of thing where science then always falls behind, right? Because there's not a lot of polypharmacy being used. The closest thing is in HIV. Sometimes there'll be multiple chemicals used, but again, you're talking about HIV. So the outcome is, the muscle gain is not going to be the same as in you and I. No. But you can even see it in the golden era bodybuilders. They were doing it by default, right? So the classic cycle most of these guys are running was Deca, Primo, and D-ball, right? So D-ball was magnifying the androgen receptor activity of the Primo and the Nandrolone.
Yeah.
Right? They didn't even, and it was giving some level of estrogen too. They didn't even know what they were doing. It was what was available, and it worked.
With the scientific evidence showing that androgen receptor expression is upregulated in the presence of androgens, is that results that in more genomic or non-genomic responses, or both?
Probably both to some degree, but mostly we know what the genomic response. So during the translation stage, so originally it was thought that when an androgen receptor was bound, that it would cause another androgen receptor, but that's not an efficient process. So what's actually happening is when the androgen receptor goes into the nucleus, and during the translation stage of protein synthesis, a new androgen receptor is formed because it's part of that new DNA. So it's during that process. So where you could limit that if you're not eating enough food, that translation stage is the only stage in protein synthesis that your body's looking for some level of calories, right? It needs energy. Now, it's not great. And this is also where guys go wrong. They're eating too much food. You don't need to eat a massive amount of food over maintenance to allow this to occur. But if you're in a deficit during translation, who's to say that there will be more androgen receptors created? Right? Because you're probably slowing protein synthesis down. Trenbolone could perhaps outwork that, but none of the other drugs are really going to do that.
All right, so Trenbolone is part of every cutting stack, what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So that's probably another reason to use it.
Yeah.
But you could be any of those things. It could be, Anadrol with right? Again, test as a basic could be Anadrol with EQ or Anadrol. Again, they're probably not as effective as with Trenbolone, because now you're talking about KD values. You're talking about the constant of the strength of a drug. The strength of Trenbolone is significantly stronger. It has a lower KD value, which means it's stronger than EQ, for instance. Right? Testosterone would be another good example. Testosterone would be significantly stronger on a milligram basis than Primobolan.
Now, from what I do understand from all the research that I've done, like the genomic versus non-genomic responses have been poorly documented. So maybe with more time, probably not, because it seems that the medical community gives fuck all about.
This is what I'm trying to work
into
on.
the steroids. So, yeah, right.
So,
well, you're You're leading the pack, but we need more people on this subject, obviously. So like for some of the steroids, I don't think this will ever be investigated. So we might get non-genomic responses, just like we might get aromatase inhibition, right, from certain steroids, but it will never be studied. So we have to go with anecdotal reports. And this is why sometimes stacks might just be, based on the scientific evidence, don't make sense because the studies haven't been performed yet.
Correct.
We have this study. We can put it in the link below. I'll share my screen. This is a really nice picture, which is all the non-genomic responses. And this is from non-genomic responses in response to cardiovascular disease. And it was more so aimed around, apoptotic pathways that happen from non-genomic responses, whether it's through the G-protein coupled receptor, the cell surface androgen receptor that plays off into the calcium signaling. What we sort of talk about with either strength increases or neurodegeneration or dopamine stimulation through the L-type calcium channel, increase in CAM and calmodulin and calcium intake into the cell.
When I mentioned
as you can
nerves,
see, most of
when
the
I said nerves before, that's just
non-genomic-
talking about calcium.
No.
we say like the non-genomic pathway, as you can see, is quite a negative pathway where you're increasing, apoptosis on about 4 different levels. But then you do get some increase in nitric oxide, some increase in calcium signaling. Some of obviously the signaling down into the endoplasmic reticulum plays off into muscle protein synthesis as well. So, and obviously the ERK pathway. But like Kurt said, we're way behind that. That picture is all based off, I guess, testosterone and animal studies, as opposed to being, looking at Anavar, oxandrolone, Winstrol, etc. The paper, people can go read it. It's all based off what's sort of viewed in vitro, and animal studies.
And I think one of the limiting factors why we can't do polypharmacy with this stuff is because the dosing becomes a problem, right? Because and what drugs are you combining? How would you study all this, the possible combinations, and then the genetic response, and then you get guys that use 300 milligrams total, and you get guys that use 10,000 milligrams total. The responses can be totally different.
Yeah,
so can't really be studied.
No, and probably that at those dosage ranges that we're interested in, that would probably think it's unethical.
And medically, what are you doing? Where's the application there?
Hey, but they prescribe 18 IUs of growth hormone per day for AIDS patients. So maybe we can find a medical condition where you need 10,000 milligrams of steroids combined.
Yeah. Well, so people understand where that came from. There's confusion. So when you have HIV, you don't really lose muscle size. Like if any of us are inactive for a period of time, you're going to lose muscle size, but you should retain your cells. During HIV, you actually lose cell mass. And certain steroids can increase cell mass, but just not that greatly. Like Anadrol can, but it's not a really robust response. With all the studies on growth hormone, based on weight, it seems that 6 milligrams or 18 units is basically where the new cell mass forms and is permanent. When they used lower doses, and again, this is without steroids in the mix, so who knows when you combine other things in there. Right. The lower doses, the cell mass increased, but then after a 6-month washout period, the new cells were gone. So this is where the 6 milligrams came from for HIV. That is basically the dose that will cause new cell growth. So when guys are like, 5 IUs is enough to get hyperplasia, based on what I don't know, because that's not what any study shows. That doesn't mean it won't occur.
6 milligram or 18 IUs per day. Yeah.
Not necessarily. I mean, again, we don't know because of the polypharmacy. You don't know if you're using test with it or whatever else with it, what will occur. But that was just made up. I don't know where the 5 units came from.
I don't know.
That's
It's enough
bodybuilders
for
made that up.
it's enough for volume.
Because you better believe if the pharmaceutical companies, if the pharmaceutical companies could get away with giving, a milligram of GH, they would gladly mark up 1 milligram instead of giving 6.
True. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Very
and
true.
the same thing. Like I find anything really under 9, 8 or 10, it's not doing the whole ton. Right.
I mean, it's mostly volume and size, but yeah, when I started increasing to 10 IUs, that's where the mutation starts to happen.
Yeah.
And I can see that not only in my physique, but also in my face. Right?
And it's almost daily. At 18, it's daily.
Yeah, I can imagine. I wouldn't be able to deal with the carpal tunnel.
But
I'm happy that
was the fatigue.
Could be.
You wouldn't even get that far with the carpal tunnel because you couldn't stay awake.
Weird thing is, on 10 IUs, I'm absolutely great, but that might be the mitochondrial boost from the SLU, the methylene blue, the MOTS-C, and the whole shebang that I'm on.
Well, 9, I'm fine too. It just 18 was, and I was doing it all at night. Even if I took it at 9 o'clock at night, went to bed at 10:30 or 11, still by 6 o'clock in the evening the next day, I was still exhausted. So it was like this constant cycle of being exhausted. I would start to wake up right before I took 18 units again. But if you're bedridden and you're dying, what does it really matter if you're tired? The sleep will probably help you stay healthy.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's the same as with Masteron, right? I mean, these women are not going to complain about a little bit of virilization if it keeps them alive.
Yeah. Yeah, sex is not what's on their mind at that moment.
No, I can agree. Dean, anything you want to contribute to these genomic and non-genomic responses? Because you two are way more versed into this stuff than I am.
I think in terms of like long-term future consequences on what we're sort of studying with the non-genomic side, it's probably one of the main things that's going to help us understand controlling the maybe neurodivergence, if you want to put it that way, or the dopamine toxicity issues, or even then, how are you going to mitigate if you're taking a lot of androgens and they don't interact with the androgen receptor, now they're interacting with the calcium channel to bring more calcium inside your nerves. Yeah, great for power development or strength. But then if it's influencing how your dopamine neurons fire in your brain, like I keep saying, that electrical potential of the nerve is just getting higher and higher, that when you reduce your dose and you don't have a lot of these androgens now stimulating those channels, the electrical potential of the nerve is still looking for that stimulation. That you're sort of left with these mood issues then until you go back to these massively high dosages.
Yep.
So
yeah, that's why guys go back to Trenbolone. Once you start, it becomes difficult to stop.
Yeah, I was off of it for 8 years.
That's might be the longest ever recorded in history.
Yeah.
Guys usually make it about 8 days.
8 days, yeah. It's like, I gotta get on there. Yeah, let's see what happens after I come off. If my, it was a low dose, so I think I'll be okay.
There's probably something to be said about maturity too. You're probably more prone in younger years. You being mature. I think younger guys using it probably are more prone to the addictive thing with it.
Well, look, it's a social media of 26 years old on Trenbolone. It's all addicted to gambling now.
Yeah, I mean, when you sort of look at that, it might explain why when you have not the sort of maybe polypharmacy, when you, unless post-show or something, you've got an end goal where your sort of dopamine drive is to get on stage, say, as an end goal. If there's nothing beyond the stage to look forward to, you get guys that get severely depressed after competing.
Post-contest blues. It's a condition, man. I've coached many guys through it.
And, that could be a thing of you're going from that really high calcium signaling back to, if you're going to go back to a normal low level of androgens post-show, that will contribute to the low mood.
Which you don't see.
Shopping helps.
Yeah, at the high level, you don't see that, right? The guys, again, not discussed publicly, but the guys at the high level are not really coming off, right? There might be some sort of cruise occurring there, but the cruise is not what most people consider a cruise.
Cruise is more than what I'm running right now.
The cruise is generally 2 grams, and that's very short-lived, right? That's literally until blood markers are like decent.
Yeah, it's usually 2 or 3 months, depending on the competition season.
And
but
then
if you go from the Olympia to the Arnold Classic, you do a couple shows in between, you're just saucing your socks off the whole year. Yeah, and somehow these guys can get away with it due to genetic response. Their blood work doesn't really change. The water retention is at them seen, or they're shredded year round. You're like, how the fuck is that happening? It's just, they have superior genetics than everybody else.
It's one of the protocols that I've seen where they do detox protocols where they just stop taking.
Don't get me started.
Stop taking everything for 2 to 3 months, and go back on again. So you have this detox washout period. You're like thinking to yourself, yeah, it's great probably for the first 2 or 3 weeks, and then you get into the crux of it, and you're wondering why they feel horrible while their blood markers are gone to absolute shit, and out of nowhere, then you just start blasting again. Oh yeah, body's detoxed, back on the go.
I wonder how many of these guys got rhabdomyolysis towards the end, because you're trying to sustain so much muscle mass without these androgens and growth hormone or whatever else in the picture, that at one point you might have a kidney dump, and CPK and creatinine and all that stuff just goes haywire, and it might be more deleterious than just staying on a cruise dose of 500 to 700 milligrams a week. Because all that protein is going through your kidneys, man, once you start dumping it through rhabdomyolysis. If there's not enough androgens there to sustain it and training intensity is 0, then you basically bedridden yourself. And then it starts breaking down.
Go somewhere.
Maybe that's the reason why these guys get kidney issues, because they came off.
Well, there's also the newly discussed thing with the oil, the site enhancement oil breaking down is going to destroy your kidneys too.
Yeah, I knew that from the beginning. That shit is toxic, man. That's such a poison.
If you're concerned about the oil used in your gear, you go just inject huge amounts of oil into your body.
Fuck no, man. I would never. I mean, I never understood why guys, okay, if you want to use a little bit of side enhancement to get on stage, fine. But these insane protocols that they're running with like 3 milliliters in multiple parts of the body and with silica inside, of course you're going to die. Come on, man. Just get a BBL and be done with it. Okay, last topic today, mirabegron. People have been asking me. I already recorded the deep dive, so that will be up before this podcast goes live. Dean was very excited to run it. Kurt, did you ever look into mirabegron and beta-3 adrenergic receptor stimulation, or what's your thought on this?
Not with that drug specifically, but beta-3 stuff, sure.
Yeah. And Dean, of course, you were one of the first to talk about it, but you never got your hands on it. Don't worry, I ran the experiment for you.
Yeah, we seem to all be the willing guinea pigs when it comes to each other's ideas or figuring out how to I guess, progress enhanced bodybuilding, which is obviously what people are here to listen to.
Yeah, well, but this is why I wanted to get us 3 together, because we all have unique ideas, and you guys make me want to experiment to figure out a higher truth. Kurt said something like, interesting. I do the research, and I'm like, yeah, okay, makes sense. And then I'm going to fucking run it, see what happens.
I guess, delve into it was, I had a debate years ago over the fat loss properties of Clen and, using ketotyphon to prolong the fat loss. And I was like, well, not really, because when you look at what causes fat loss, lipolysis, it's beta-3. The beta-2, creates a adrenergic response where you shake. And obviously as you shake, you increase thermogenesis and NEAT and calorie expenditure. But just because that sort of beta-2 adrenergic response dampens then where you stop the shaking and everything else after, a couple of weeks, doesn't mean that clenbuterol isn't a fat burning agent for lipolysis. You're just not getting the added benefit of the extra shaking and NEAT that is burning calories, 5% of your BMR in the background. So that was sort of where I was like, well, ketotyphon, will prolong that beta-2. So you have the shakes and you have the elevated heart rate, and that plays into the bigger picture. But if you're talking about fat burning, it's consistently fat burning or causing lipolysis through beta-3.
Yeah, beta-3 doesn't downregulate in non-obese subjects. Nope.
That's what
doesn't regulate.
We looked into that then, me and Kurt on a podcast last year, and that beta-3 just seems like this magic thing that has gone sort of swept under the radar from a fat loss perspective in enhanced bodybuilding. And the only thing that I could find, and this was like 2017, was mirabegron, but you just for the life could not get it anywhere. So it sort of sat in the defense there on the table of, if someone can get hold of it, knock yourselves out to tell me how it looks. And then we start to see obviously the rat data of how effective it is as a browning agent is the other thing that, the browning of your wife fat as well is another great positive of mirabegron.
Yeah, so it does increase brown adipose tissue within white adipose tissue only in the subcutaneous space. It's called beiging, and increase brown adipose tissue energy expenditure, which also raises basal body temperature quite a bit, and it can increase it by 7 to was it 15% depending on the dose, which is huge. Yeah, so at the 150 milligram dose, which I found to be the most effective one, because at 200 milligrams, there is some beta-1 adrenergic receptor spillover. And that might also be caused by beta-3 adrenergic receptor downregulation, but that it simply hasn't been studied. So in the medical insert of mirabegron, they said at 200 milligrams daily, it spills over to the beta-1, increasing heart rate. So I included that in my deep dive. But so 50 milligrams, multiple servings per day, even though the half-life is 50 hours, that seems to mitigate most of the side effects that are found in the human studies, because there's a good amount of human studies in healthy individuals regarding mirabegron at higher dosages, regarding the increasing energy expenditure, blood pressure, resting heart rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So instead of doing 150 milligrams or 200 milligrams in one serving, you can mitigate the side effects with multiple servings per day, so you don't get this peak. The peak occurs at about 180 minutes after the serving. So taking it an hour pre-workout, okay, you get some effect, but most of the thermogenesis and fatty acid oxidation occurs well after the dosing. But dosing it 3 times per day seems to be the most effective. And then combining it with a low-dose clenbuterol or salbutamol really takes the fat loss to the next level, because clenbuterol spills over into the beta-3 from about 80 micrograms onwards. And salbutamol spills over into the beta-1 from about 8 milligrams per day onwards when you take it orally. So this is why a lot of guys, they say, clenbuterol really works at 120 micrograms daily, because it's 80 micrograms working on the beta-2 and 40 micrograms is working on the beta-3. Clenbuterol is already anabolic from 40 micrograms onwards. So I combined 40 micrograms clenbuterol with 150 milligrams mirabegron. Okay, heart rate increases to the point it's uncomfortable, so I ran it for a couple of days. But fat loss, holy shit, man. Holy shit, it's next level. 8 or 6 milligrams salbutamol with 150 milligrams mirabegron. Just as well of a fat loss, but less of the shakes and less of the heart rate increase. And I believe from 4 milligrams onwards, salbutamol has anabolic properties. So if you run salbutamol between 4 to 6 milligrams and mirabegron 100 to 150 milligrams, which I discussed in a deep dive, you get the beta-2 and beta-3 adrenergic response. So you get some anabolism and fat loss through beta-2 and fat loss through beta-3 with minimal increase in heart rate. So we might have found a new champion over clenbuterol solo.
Your sleep quality improves because you're not waking up every 2 hours to piss in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That's in the first minute I mentioned that, because instead of 4 P's, you have 2. Now, the problem is that every P is twice as long because it's the same volume of urine. So you sit there like, when is this going to be done? It's literally like Austin Powers. First movie. Yeah. It's literally like that. You just sit there. Evacuation complete? No, still going. So that's the downside. And after this experiment with salbutamol and mirabegron and clenbuterol mirabegron and running clen and salbutamol solo to kind of compare, I'm off of it because it's too much better adrenergic receptor stimulation for me for the last couple of weeks. The only real downside of mirabegron is that some people notice water retention, but I did not notice that. Beyond the growth hormone and the ribosine that I'm taking and the creatine. So I probably take the growth hormone out this weekend, and then the ribosine out and the creatine out, throw the mirabegron in, 1 more week of fat loss, and then see what happens regarding water retention. But after these experiments, I'm pretty fucking diced.
I bet.
Yeah, especially with the SLU. I ramp it up to 800 micrograms per day, Dean.
Wow.
I'm wired.
6 was my top. And, like what we've had a chat over, I've been pretty much consistently taking it since February, end of January, February. And my blood work has shown no detriment from it. So seems to be, quote unquote, N equals 1 relatively safe. Whether, in 10 years' time, I eat my words on what my blood work is showing now. It definitely has been the sort of godsend of this year's prep, if you want to put it that way, because I started taking SLU when I was actually in like a cycle phase, like a push phase. When we put in a small amount before the Arnold UK, and I was getting heavier but leaner at the same time. It was, and back then I was like, okay, something magic is happening here. I wonder what happens when you swap over into a like strict fat loss.
It's a wonderful compound. I haven't been that excited for a compound since 5-amino-1-MQ, but this works in any phase. And 5-amino-1-MQ, for the price, it only works when you're sub 6% body fat. Yeah. And even then, it's lackluster sometimes, I would say.
Yeah, it's like, the 5-amino-1-MQ, like we discussed, it's sort of like your last sort of tool in the box to get the last little bit off through obviously inhibiting NAD synthesis, but for the cost
inhibiting
of it,
recycling. Promoting
promoting this
inhibiting the N-methyltransferase enzymes to increase NAD plus levels in adipose tissue. Now you have increased fat metabolism, or at least it's sustained. In combination with SLU and mirabegron, it's the golden triangle for sure. It's going to be interesting, the physiques that come out now over the next 12 months with what we're the followers of this channel who are, listening to what we're discussing. You know what's bad? I sometimes see hints of what we discuss on other podcasts, but the credit is not given, and that pisses me off a little bit. But that's okay. It's fine. As long as these guys are doing their blood work frequently, and as long as you're focusing on mitochondrial health and antioxidant status and leveraging compounds at lower dosages, then I'm happy. Then I consider a job done. And then maybe at one point they will say, like, just like what they do with the DC training, for example, dog crap, right? He was way ahead of his time, and we learned so much from these guys, and then maybe we'll be in the running for that kind of knowledge too later on. But yeah, well, we'll see who draws the pros at the Olympia booth. And probably us. Steve, I can't say this publicly, but Kurt, I couldn't say this publicly, but oh, well, we know who's in our inboxes, so
we do indeed.
Yeah, we do indeed. Do you guys want to touch on Ngenla real quick?
Sure.
Might as well, right? Let's do that for 10 minutes. So
I got 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So Chase Irons ran a wonderful experiment with Ngenla. He's the only one I know that actually run it at higher dosages. He already did a great explanation on his YouTube channel and on Paul's podcast that you were a part of. His serum growth hormone was like 100 nanograms per milliliter, which you would only get if you IV 2 IU's growth hormone 5 minutes before drawing blood. But this HCG subunit at the N and C terminal, I don't know. It's bothersome to me somehow because it's active very long. Now, Chase Irons didn't get any loss of insulin sensitivity, not any issues with his hemoglobin A1C. Fasting insulin levels didn't go up. Fasting glucose didn't go up. He lives the lifestyle. Right? He does the ice baths and the sauna, and he's very meticulous. He does blood work every 2 weeks now. And he's on a boatload of steroids, so that I'm sure that helps. But for general population, I'm still not convinced that it's going to be suitable because when you compare it to MK677, increasing growth hormone levels free from fatty acids and blunting insulin sensitivity or full-blown insulin resistance, you would need to use this with a sodium glucose type 2 inhibitor to prevent serum glucose levels from going too high and otherwise making you, severely insulinemic. Right? Or am I seeing this in the wrong way?
No, to back up a little bit, it was designed for delayed growth in children, right? Mm-hmm. So the initial thought was that it was uncomfortable for children to do the daily injection. So they were looking for something to prolong that. But they also were looking at what is occurring that's just causing long bone growth. They were not looking at IGF per se. They're not looking to put muscle on. So it's a totally different usage than like a Ceristim for wasting. So they tacked on, so you can't because it's a peptide, you can't tack on Ester on like you would on a steroid hormone. So they tacked on 30, on that particular one, they tacked on 38 amino acids from HCG. So it's going to interact with the liver differently. The purpose was it should stimulate IGF-2, similar to placental GH secretion. So the mother's GH doesn't necessarily go to the fetus. The placenta secretes its own GH in a more steady manner, similar to this long-acting stuff. But because of that, it's not doing IGF-1, it's doing IGF-2, which is just, in a child, will cause long bone growth. In an adult, it has no function. So it wasn't designed to be used for anabolism. So those numbers, again, in serum doesn't mean they're doing anything, right? Because, again, it could be an absorption thing. It could be it's bound to something.
Yeah.
And it was never studied.
So in serum, it's growth hormone, but it has these three tails on the N and C terminal. So it doesn't actually act as growth hormone.
Correct.
Now, Chase got phenomenal fullness, size, water retention, all the hallmarks of running growth hormone at higher dosages. What I'm wondering is, would he get the same amount of muscle growth over time as running 18 IUs with Serostim or 12 IUs or whatever he was running before? And his IGF-1 barely budged, right? But he doesn't produce that much IGF. So I'm willing to undergo this experiment myself because I do get a good IGF-1 response at higher dosages of growth hormone. What I'm worried about is if you're running this in a non-fasting or caloric restrictive state, that the free-form fatty acids are just going to be too high for insulin sensitivity to stay sustained. Now, when you run anti-obesity drug or HGH frag, which is actually just a C terminal, right, part of growth hormone set to induce lipolysis, if you inject 1 milligram of that, it would be the exact same amount of C terminals as 8 IUs or 9 IUs of growth hormone. And nobody gets insulin resistance from these compounds. But since this HCG is bound to the C terminal, this part of the molecule can't bind to the growth hormone receptor. So how much lipolysis would you actually get from this compound?
I don't know.
We don't know. In the scientific evidence, IGF-1 isn't really mentioned, besides a couple studies. But when you compare that to the albumin-bound growth hormone, what is it called? I have it linked here somewhere. The albumin-bound growth hormone, this actually shows that it raises IGF-1 quite a bit. It's called Soma Pakitan Bako from Novo Nordisk. Sogroya, that's albumin-bound growth hormone, and then somatrogen Ngenla from Pfizer, and Ngenla, that's the HCG subunit-bound growth hormone. Yeah. And,
it's not to say it couldn't work. I think it's great. And I Chase is a great friend of mine. I support all the stuff he does because he's like, if he didn't do this stuff, we wouldn't have half the answers.
We wouldn't know. No.
So I love that he does this stuff.
He's spending all of his own money, man, on the organ imaging and the drugs. And it's amazing. Yeah. There's not many guys
my
out
only
there
concern is that he eventually, what are the side effects? What is occurring? Because you see in older pediatric patients, I've seen kids 16 to 21 that were on the long-acting stuff, and they were not getting the same response as you would expect when they switched from genotropin. They were not. So I don't know. But again, the dose was used at the correct dose. He's using a way larger dose than it was, right? He was using a pen a day or something.
Yeah.
So
yeah, or
again,
one pen every other day.
We don't know.
Yeah,
so.
we don't know. Right. And he's the only guy who ran it. So I'll probably order some myself after doing some more research. It does look very promising based on Chase's results, but I do have some concerns.
When the cost, when he broke it down with the cost, it was the same price as doing Serostim.
Exactly.
And honestly, I've had nothing but great luck with Serostim, so I have no plans of switching from that.
Yeah, exactly. Dean, have you looked into this Ngenla or other long-acting growth hormone analogs?
No, other than having the discussion with Kurt over it before. I guess, when we sort of look at why they're developed from a pharmacy perspective, it's to improve, I guess, half-life, to, residency time. But beyond that, I mean, why wouldn't you just, like frequency of injection? It's the albumin one is a little bit interesting from what I've read into, but similarly again, I'm just struggling to see what is the overall sort of end benefit of these being prescribed medications rather than the Ngenla obviously for growth deficiency in children, and obviously having to just administer one shot for every month or so, depending on what rate of delivery is required, offers some level of compliance where you're not having to inject the child every single day. But beyond that, from a bodybuilding perspective, it's like a lot of the exotic steroid compounds that we see and sort of have experimented with, but like what we've done with the classification, there's the tried and tested standard time ones that we just go back to.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me that a couple of years from now people will use it in Ngenla, but that's usually during a cutting phase with daily administrations or while fasting. I think that's the practical application of it if it's significantly cheaper. But if you break it down cost-wise, and again, you can't really go by serum levels because the metabolism is so different, right? It's 37 hours versus 4.5 hours with intramuscular injections or subcutaneous. And so it has a blood building effect, obviously. And if it doesn't interact with the receptor the same way because of these HCG subunits, right? If you don't get the same amount of transcription, then how valid are these serum levels?
Yeah, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. It does look promising though, but the
It
price
could
wise,
very well be. Yeah.
But there's not so much details on it yet. Yeah,
No,
but then
and
again,
my
with
biggest-
SLU, there's no details, and everybody's swearing by it now. Everybody's running the SLU.
Yeah, my only concern with it is that it's you want GH to be pulsatile, right? You don't want it to be steady state for what the effects are, right? Because you will become diabetic at a certain point.
Yeah, that's what I'm most
Right?
concerned
That's why
with.
that's why we run that's why you run. I always found the best way, the same way they use GH medically. Just do the bolus at night before bed. You then have the high levels when you wake up in the morning if you're doing fasted cardio. You don't have to worry about injecting 4 different times a day. You get a much bigger IGF bolus in there.
Yeah.
Right. And the sleepiness, all that those issues, your better insulin response at night, versus like if you were injecting, I've never been a big fan of injecting GH 4 times during the day. That made no sense to me because first of all, what are you trying to catch that window? You have like a 4-hour lag, and you really
the
want
fat
to
loss that
elevate it
you
all the
get from
time.
GH is not that stellar anyway. I mean, let's be honest, even at
No,
higher
and
dosages.
I get the same fat loss at a bottle a day before bed than I would if I split it up. I've done both. I noticed no difference in fat loss. So the GH cap is really low. It's like 1.7 or something.
Yeah, it's not that exciting.
IGF is much stronger.
If GH was such a potent fat burner, then we wouldn't need all these other compounds in our stack. So
exactly right.
We use it for overall fullness and then just optimizing the stack that we're on. But it's the most expensive fat burner you can run for milligrams of fat lost. It does prevent you from getting fat during the off season. I'll tell you that. Like if you run higher dosages, it at least you can ramp up the food and just all the food gets partitioned into muscle tissue instead of adipose tissue. Yes. So that is the benefit of growth hormone, especially during the off season. Like almost impossible to get fat on.
If your growth hormone is good, you use enough, you're not getting fat.
Yeah, you're not getting fat.
No. And Paul Carter said something funny about it once. He said in his Q&A, he said, it's a really expensive way to make your hands go numb.
Yeah, true. Tell me about it. Okay, so for now, we'll put the Ngenla on a watch list. Let's put it that way. Let's put it on the watch list. I think Mirabicron is confirmed. I think SLU PP332 is confirmed, just like methylene blue, but methylene blue has been around for ages. But I would put this Ngenla long-acting growth hormone on the watch list, and then regarding its practical application to be determined when we have a larger sample size besides Chase Irons. Because I mean, with him everything went well, but I would like to see more anecdotal response. And guys, if you have experience with Ngenla, put it down below. Yeah. Put it down below. I would love to hear about it before I run it myself. Right? Because otherwise it's just me and Chase again, running the crazy high dosages of growth hormone and then doing the blood work and ultimately paying the price, maybe. All right, let's wrap it up here. This was absolutely great. I'm always looking forward to this podcast every single month. Dean, next time you're not allowed to be on contest prep anymore.
It'll be probably, it'll be end of October. I'll have more important things to be worrying about.
I'm going to send you some cheesecake right before the podcast so you can be super lively. Yeah, you got a big round face, just like me sometimes. And but I wish you good luck at your upcoming show this weekend. Kick some ass. please keep us in the loop. This podcast will probably drop after your show, so I'll overlay some pictures if those arrive. And then hopefully you can walk away with an overall. Mm-hmm. That will be a great way to close off the off-season. Kurt, I'll see you in 2 weeks.
A couple weeks. Yep. My forum is also live. I just haven't fully I haven't officially launched it, but it's forums at Atomic Life, forum.atomiclife.com. People can join now.
I'll link it down below.
There's all the most current steroid stuff is in there. There's a medical and steroid library in there, and I'll be adding stuff all the time. And there's a bunch of pros. People want to interact with pro bodybuilders that they don't normally get to talk to. They're in there.
Crazy.
That's cool.
Have to sign up.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I wish
I had time to sign up, but I'll talk to you on WhatsApp. That's where I got you guys. I have direct access.
Exactly.
Guys, this was great. Next time we record is end of October. Hopefully with some good news about the Mr. Olympia. So it'll be probably October 23rd or 30th. And I can't wait. Guys, if you have some suggestions for topics, let us know down below. We'll do the S-tier list or the tier list for the oral steroids. And then we'll fill in the blanks with some more cool stuff because, well, with the Anabolic Roundtable, it's always groundbreaking shit.
Pleasure.
Always. Well, this was great, guys. I'll see you next month.
Yep.
Peace out.